What is up, my friends? This is the Protect Your Neck podcast, and I'm your host, Dan Tom. Analysis work you can find over at MMA Junkie, as well as the ActionNetwork.com. But on this year program, the Protect Your Neck podcast, we break down high-level MMA, but in a slightly different way, especially on the rare UFC off week. We get to kind of look back at history, fill the proverbial holes, if you will, the space that you don't really even get to, I don't know. A lot of people look forward to matchups and stuff. I barely do that, even though I did the rare quote tweet for a future matchup today. But the sport basically moves so fast. Sometimes we got to take a break, look at the past. And to do that, I like to bring in a co-host. I would love to bring in much more and do these much more for you guys. So when I do it, and I'm able to give you a guess, I try to do the best I can to provide a good one. And well, I feel really good about the one I got for you today. He is one of the best analysts in this space. Whether you're following combat sports, hopefully you're following him. It's one of my new favorite follows, as he has regraced the podcast space with mixing martial arts. I believe you can follow on all podcast platforms. Just go to mixingmartialarts.com or follow him even better at Ryan A. Wag MMA on the artist formerly known as Twitter. What is up, Ryan?
That was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Dan. Hey, I'm super happy to be back on. It's been way too long, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. And folks, for what it's worth, I did. If you're mad at any audio things, especially me as normal, I usually am too loud over my guests. Ryan, I get that complaint a lot. Justifiably so. So I did try to turn down a little more, not to wash out your excellent analysis, which I'll be leaning on because honestly, this is like a fun episode where usually I'd be very, my stereotypical Asian shame would come out for like not doing not like, contemplating suicide to the point of doing prep work. Like unless I go to that level, I feel like I've underdone it, kind of like the old Chuck Norris jokes. He didn't consider it sex if the woman survived. Very disturbing, by the way. Was that a joke we really used to do? Anyways, the point is, this was a nice, not dark episode, and not too. I didn't have to go too deep in the well to like find a bunch of cool examples of things I want to talk about, whether or not they make the list. Of course, we haven't said the title. Of course, if you're reading the title, whether you're on YouTube, thumbs up, thank you, likes are appreciated, or listening on podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Again, subscribe to Ryan's podcast. Give us both some 5-star ratings and reviews. But this is going to be the top 5 transition games in MMA. Top 5 phase shifting fighters. Basically fighters that whether they rely upon some phase shifting to kind of make their money. That's how we know them for. And when we say top 5, of course, we're not saying the top 5 because then everybody would be, trying to kill each other over the same list. It is your top 5. It's going to be Ryan's top 5. This will be my top 5 list. And if you submitted yours, we'll definitely give love to everybody's list that we can. But that's basically the gist for people that, I know sometimes these titles can leave a lot to the imagination. But yes, top 5 transition games in MMA is what we settled upon, So, Ryan, as we were kind of talking, to set this topic up and jump in here because you had some excellent thoughts as well. But in a basic sense, kind of breaking it down from a basic, can they go from, striking to grappling, from a really broad sense? You zoom in a little bit. Well, how does one go from striking to grappling? You think about fighters who would mix their striking and maybe hit a sweet level change because wrestling was the connecting piece to the jiu-jitsu, right? Or the ground fighting, right? The newaza, whatever your classification of the ground fighting, right? And you kind of go from there, right? Well, what's in between the wrestling? What if it's not a clean shot? Well, now you're in the area of the clinch. How does someone transition to and from the clinch, right? And that is kind of my very just basic way of explaining it from a basic level inside out. But connecting it to the history of the sport, because this isn't like a top 5, featherweight fights. The featherweight division started at whatever, right? This is kind of a unique topic. So a lot of times you hear like maybe newer fans, the Conor McGregor era may have heard, or this is actually before the McGregor era fans, where you may have heard Rogan saying, Rory McDonald, this guy, he grew up in the mixed martial arts era, mixing the martial arts, being talented at everything. Now,
The final evolution, he can do everything.
Yeah, and now
Doesn't get any better than this.
Right. Now, me and Ryan didn't talk about Rory McDonald, so I hope I'm not burning anybody from our list or anything. But just because Rogan was applying that, that doesn't mean that Rory, would make this list, or that Rory was it wasn't that he was bad at transitioning, right? But I think what Rogan was trying to say more is that fighters, were more specialists in the early days. You saw that more common, whereas as the sport evolved, we were waiting for that next generation who came up in the more evolved sense, which is, I might not look at folks, but I'm more of the prehistoric sense, where I came up in the Taekwondo and the karate boom 90s, of the North American boom, right? I'm not sure if it was like that in Canada, Ryan, in the 90s, but yeah,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
more, the guys finding their way to the sport like that. Maybe it was. Shout out to the late great Ryan Jimmo, right? Karate guy went over to
Yeah,
MMA.
that's right.
Um, but if you really want to talk about that, like a lot of guys actually fit that bill before Rory McDonald. I will often point as far as early guys, and this was a really great refresher doing that top 25 Brazilians in the UFC list. And Marco Huas, of course, makes a list, king of the streets, right? And for people unaware, he wasn't just like the foot stomp guy, right? This guy did luta livre, which was like pretty much Brazilian submission wrestling. He had the black belt in that. I know Brazil kind of, just like, which is, hey, it's more legit than a lot of the belt martial arts we have here in North America, but they often give the Muay Thai black belt. But the point is, Marco Huas, for an early guy, you see a well-rounding of martial arts, and when you dig further into the story, he almost has the Bruce Lee effect, where like, because again, even within these more contact and less you would associate with traditional martial arts, whether it was like luta livre and their street matches with Brazilian jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai, you still had the same like, whatever you call small town, towny, religion, whatever parallel you want to bring to martial arts, you had that where people would, ours is the best. It's just our crew, right? And so on and so forth. And he actually got a lot of crap for being able to do that, for doing that. But it paid off in the sense of like he was a really well-rounded martial artist, and you compare to what other guys were doing, you're like, oh wow, okay, now would he make this list? That's why I'm burning his name here. It's because would he make this list as a guy who was transitioning fluidly like other fighters we're going to talk about here? Maybe not necessarily, right? And another fighter from the 90s, before I pass it to Ryan here, was Frank Shamrock, who you hear this a lot about. He was another guy. He was one of the first guys that could do everything, right? And it was true. And Frank Shamrock was less through traditional martial arts and more through just raw athleticism and creativity. Arguably more athletic than the previously mentioned name, despite not being as big of an imposing force. Frank Shamrock, very athletic. Was able to, apply things like cage wall walks. One of the first guys to be doing that back when I was in junior high, dickhead. Just quoting Die Hard there. I think the kids call it middle school now. But yeah, like he was doing it way back then, and he was really good transition fighter for his day. So I don't even want to say that he couldn't make this list or whatever. He could make your list, and it's justified. But these are the guys who I think, as far as laying the ground for, even because before you can transition, you have to have the skills to transition to, right? And I think we needed these guys first. Does that make sense, Ryan, as I pass the ball to you? I know you have some great examples too.
That slam on Igor Zinoviev just lives in my mind. Sometimes I see it when
Yes.
I close my eyes. Just one of the first things that you look at and are like, okay, this MMA thing, this is a different sport, and this could be something. One
Yeah.
of the guys I always bring up for that kind of early pioneer stuff is Murilo Bustamante.
Great
He
show.
was, I only got into MMA somewhere after the tough stuff with like Griffin and Bonner. And then the first fight I remember really caring about was BJ Penn versus Frankie Edgar 1. But I've gone back and watched most of the early UFC stuff, all the early Pride stuff.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first guys who looks like he's actually doing MMA as something we recognize it today is Murilo Bustamante. He didn't just have the like I can strike and I can grapple stuff, which was the thing that defined most of the elite fighters back then. But he was able to start kind of putting it together and like implementing best practices from both boxing, BJJ, and wrestling, and kind of combining them a little bit. One of the things that stood out for me, he was kind of the first guy that I've really seen like use a little throwaway jab to draw out counters and shoot underneath them, which is something I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about tonight.
Yeah. No, absolutely. He was always known as a jiu-jitsu guy, but like he actually had, I think, an amateur boxing background that you don't really hear like the commentators, the American commentators, start picking up till later in his career.
Yep.
It was a kind of a short career when you look back at it, in a sense, as far as like his prime matches. I mean, even his losses, I went back to watch, and it gets a little tricky trying to score those, especially back then. But like the Chuck Liddell fight, definitely should have. I think he should have won. Quentin Rampage Jackson fight, I'm a little more iffy on. But like the fact that he was competitive with a prime Rampage Jackson, I believe semi short notice, was, even though he did fight at 205 before, was moving back up after this was after he was the UFC middleweight champion. Like a lot of champions was, not an excuse for the UFC, but part of the reason why they have such tight contracts. Ryan mentioned BJ Penn walking away as champ. Murilo Bustamante was among those names, include with BJ Penn and Randy Couture, as far as guys to walk away on the top. After clearing some people out, and toward a top name in the division. And
Yeah.
Bustamante was that. He was not, the A side, but he was able to mix things up. Was also deceptive in the clinch too, especially considering he was fighting like guys like Matt Lindland, right, for some of those title defenses, and like guys who actually could comport themselves there, even for that time.
The
So
Dan
Bustamante,
Henderson win too,
oh
or
yeah,
loss for Bustamante was always one that was controversial. It's part of like the Decision Dan run where he was
yeah,
getting kind of like kind judging from the Pride judges.
yeah. I was gonna say very favorable. Yeah, very favorable.
A
Absolutely.
lot of very good guys that would go on to become big stars had very tough fights with Bustamante.
Yep, yep. And by the way, if anyone was wondering, who was also just kind of he always reminds me of Bustamante as far as one, especially doesn't get the love he deserves, and I think one or two things go his way differently, especially him as Pedro Hizzo. Because as much as I love Randy, right, like let's be honest, leg kicks were definitely not getting the credit they deserved back then, as far as their first fight went. I'm talking about, of course. Randy still has like a dent in his leg to this day from it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. So these guys kind of laid, and maybe even have some lineage connections to fighters we will talk about coming up here. So I think that's a pretty decent explanation as far as both what the topic is and both, using fighters as examples in a historical sense to build to the foundation needed for a lot of these fighters and games to exist. Right? You feel that, Ryan? Did we leave anything out?
Yeah, I think we've done a good job covering the groundwork there.
Okay. Uh, Again, as usual, we're going to go through our top five back and forth. We're going to work from 5 to 1, kind of like a tennis game, but mixed with Chinese fire drills, because there's going to be crossover. We're going to be, switching who's got the steering wheel, and doing all that nonsense. And at the end, we're going to go to your guys' listener list, which of course you can always submit at the PYN Podcasts, or me at Dan Tom MMA. Mainly on the artist formerly known as Twitter, or when I'm, have enough time to actually post. You're a one-man producer. It's tough. It's tough, folks. And I know, Ryan, you do a lot of your own one-man work, and it's an excellent work yourself, so you know how it goes. But yeah, mainly the artist formerly known as Twitter. But, Burgundy will read what is on the monitor. So for what it's worth, if you want to contribute to this here program. Missing the live chat people normally when I do these shows. Shout out to them. I think I raised some monsters too, and I mean that in like the most complimentary way, because like I'm at the point where like I almost have like this top five show is one of the only things, like especially with the I don't try to timestamp these shows too much, Ryan. But we're talking about this epic like losing streak I'm on for like the picks to the bets to all that stuff, right? That, like as far as my analysis goes, like these shows are all I have left at this point. Um, and I've kind of even given up getting angry at all the bad analysis or the bad engagement shit posting threads or whatever. Not the good threaders, of course. Y'all know who you are. Shouts to y'all. But you know what I'm saying? Like, but then I see like
The
people
ones that
calling
have been
out.
watching for like a year and then
Yeah.
they make the list that are like top 10 comebacks in MMA and they're all from the last 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yep. Yep. And then like, or just calling out bad comments like I think like Jack Slack quoted one. I went to see what it was in response to, and it's like I see a bunch of like my PYN listeners, like from like Ghost Phantom, who I know Ghost 21. He does
Yes.
excellent analysis. And he's out there like fucking getting on people. And then I see my guy Rios and Truesdale calling out like shit analysis and takes two. I'm like, you guys are making me pop. I'm like a proud papa over here. I'm like getting too old to fight, but I'm just like watching, like cheering you guys on from the sidelines. Like, yeah, I'll fight my battles. I don't know
You
if
got
that's
to get in on the
healthy.
fake payouts grift, man. Start posting those yellow numbers.
I don't. I didn't realize like, that's still people are still doing that. I didn't realize that's a thing that people are still
Those
doing. That's
posts
insane.
bang. Like they go insanely viral for absolutely no reason. I don't get it.
I don't know. I'm just like I'm getting to the point where I just like turn off whenever I see any kind of like unless you're really being funny, like or you're obviously like shouts to the analysis crew. It's analysis based. You actually have something informative behind it, right? Like I'm such a tisk in my head. Like I try not to be like fucking whatever you call it, it's that Family Guy character they made up. Fucking I forget. Um, shit. It's not Benjamin Disraeli. You don't even know who I am. But it was something like Party Pooper or something. It was equivalent to that, like Mr. Party Pooper. It's not that name, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to be a party
We'll
pooper
edit it
here,
in
but
in
yeah.
post.
Fire, you're a bigger buzzkill than Buzz Killington.
I already fucked myself. Oh, hey, here, let me bail myself out. Cheers, little island tea. So we're gonna get into our top five real quick. So I have to share the story to Ryan and pay it off. And it's not a Dan Tom episode unless I get sidetracked and have some kind of random tangent. So this won't be like a negative one or whatever. I mean, it could have been, or it could have been positive depending on who you're asking. But I think I almost died today. I don't know if I had a heart attack. I still got to Google to see what happened to me. As I sip some sugar water, that's probably great for me. Well, I should be pounding more waters. But shout out to my guy Gil. Who's been on the fight site before. Shout out to the fight site, of course. Shout out to my guy Fanyo. Strength and conditioning coach, fighter. Beat Giga Chikadze, by the way. So he should be like Phil McKenzie's favorite fighter. But of course, he's the assistant gym manager. Next to Eric Nixick, and we had a great strength and conditioning class where I just was murdered on the sleds. Just like I was like weekend. I was like weekend at Bernie's between sled runs today. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stop at home. And I'm like, oh man, I'm trying to eat better, whatever. But I'm like, how many times have you had Chipotle, Dan? And how many times did you not do like a big sled run before it and you still ate it? Now's not the time to feel bad. You need some food. And, I'd actually been pretty low on carbs. All I had was like a fruit and veggie smoothie today. So I was like, okay, fuck it, let's go. And I'm just like, tired. I'm like just lightheaded and like walking in. And I'm like, okay, at least there's no line. That's really rare. But for whatever reason with me, whenever there's no line and there's just there's only one person, oh sweet, this will go fast. Like for whatever reason, that person is always the biggest pain in the ass. Where they're just like, like even like the basic like lettuce, yes, like even something as basic as that, like it can never go simple. It's always got to be two back. What? Huh? Yeah, no, more. Huh? It's at least one back and forth extra than it should be. And then at the end when they think they're done, they're like, oh, and can I get a kid's meal? Like, oh, of course you want a fucking kid's meal. And it's like Chipotle, so it's like kids don't like Chipotle. So now you're making me wait for this child abuse for what's essentially child abuse here. And and I'm like, and I don't know if that's contributing to it because I'm like, I'm like I'm not just starving and stuff like, but I'm like feeling I'm gonna pass out. So I'm kind of nauseous. So I'm getting like those like breaths where I'm like, okay, I think now I'm gonna get to order. Also because like there's like 3 or 4 workers, but for whatever reason they're all just focusing on the one guy, and I'm like, can I just order before I pass out here? And like in my head, I'm just like, oh my god, should I not order? Should I just like supersede him and just walk over to the register lady who's not doing anything and just ask for a water? Forget the burrito at this point because I'm going to pass out. And the guy's order finally ends, and I finally start my order, and I'm thinking I can make it. And at the very end of my burrito, I was like, can you just put that on the side? I'm going to go sit down. I'm going to come back and pay for it. And I go, and I'm like, oh my god, no, I'm going to end up like, this is like the real life Heavy Hands gig where Connor talks about passing out the Denny's bathroom. I'm like, it's going to be Dan Tom at Chipotle. They're like, oh, Dan Tom, what happened? Oh, was he trying to rip off the Heavy Hands guy? No, he just died. Like, because I sit down and I'm just pouring sweat. Like I'm in a sauna. And I'm just like, oh my god, what's going on? I'm getting dizzy. And the lady looks over me. She's like, "Do you want like a cup for water or something?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, that'd be great." Because I thought about buying some water, but I couldn't even get up. And I thought she was gonna get me some water because I was like in dire straits. And she just puts the cup in front of me, and I look up and I see a bunch of lemonade, which apparently could have been death lemonade, but I was at a different place according to
Yeah, man.
Ryan.
He told me about this before the show, and I was worried he drank the Panera Bread Death Lemonade
Yeah,
that has like 5 times as much caffeine as you're supposed to get in a day, and
yeah,
has
and
led to literal deaths.
I almost did because it was the lemonade fountain and the soda fountain, and I couldn't find like where the water is. Usually, there's something that says it's under the Fanta or some shit, right? Which is always weird because it's like you always get like a weird orange sprinkle in your water, right? Like why you put it on the most like neon non-water thing? But theirs was like it looked like by the Sprite because that was the only non-tab. But I guess it was like soda water. Like I'm mixing some kind of mixed drink for like like there's like club soda. I'm like, what am I doing mixed drinks for like a pilot in his 80s? Like what's going on here? Like where's the water option? So I'm like I go to drink. I finally have muster enough energy to get up and I go to drink and it's like soda water. I'm like, ah. And the lady's like, "Are you okay?" And I just like give her a 5. Like I feel like what's his name, Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men, like just like giving the kid 100 for his shirt. It's like, here, water to keep the change, and there's only like $2 in change. And she's like, "You sure I can keep this change?" I'm like, "Yeah, just give me the water. I'm gonna die." I get
And
the
walk into
water.
Chipotle and tell the lady at the counter to flip a coin.
Yeah, yeah, I know. If I had enough energy. Oh my goodness. No, I actually went up and I just bought my burrito, and then I left. It like passed me, and I was like, "Did I just have a heart? Like, what just happened?" Like, I hadn't felt this exhausted since Thailand, but it was just a weird like your body bursts like a bubble. You start and I'm a sweaty bastard, but I'm talking about just out of nowhere, like someone just poured a bucket of water on me. Weird. I don't know, Ryan. Did I have a stroke or something?
Hey, I'm not a doctor. I cannot give medical advice, but yes, you definitely had a stroke.
Well, we'll let this podcast be the barometer for that. As I drool off the side of my mouth. Wow, Jesus, we're off to a great start. I think you really did have a stroke, folks. All right. Now that we've gotten off target as a custom, now we go back on target. Top 5 transition games in MMA. 22 minutes in, not bad. It's okay, folks. This is gonna be a fun breeze. So, Ryan, for this one, usually I let the guest go first, but my number 5 kind of flows into the conversation we were having earlier. So, would it make sense if I just get this party started?
Please do.
Okay, so we talked about fighters that, were the first to do a lot of different things. And I even mentioned like fighters more recently, like Rory McDonald, who you've heard Rogan like kind of praise, right? But if we're going by the Rogan historical, which is real dangerous, by the way, but if we're going by the Rogan historical timeline here, what I mean is the first guy, and you see this because I made a highlight of it, that may or may not play bias in here as to why he made my number 5. My number 5 spot, Ryan, is like my hipster spot, and I'm sure you're gonna have something for us there too. But like, or a hipster pick somewhere in the mix. But this is, I guess, mine. And the first guy, he actually says this guy can do it all. He's talking about beating Rich Clemente, who's got a win over Anthony Johnson and other fighters, right? The original No Love before Cody Garbrandt. Talking about not just outstriking him with savvy, but then being able to fall him to the ground and finish him, right? Club and sub, a very basic example of a lot of fighters, or what the key to, have that sort of savvy we're looking for this list, right? And this is Yves Edwards.
Ooh, that's a good one.
He is, I mean, even like, Anderson, as great of a name as Anderson Silva, who, popularized the reason why he ends up on a lot of lists, or, I always say him and Aldo always end up interchangeable at 1 and 2, but I would say the reason why Anderson ends up on maybe just ahead of a historical list more so is because you don't need as of a technical eye to appreciate a lot of the stuff Anderson did, not just because of the flashiness, but more because he gets a lot of credit for the front kick to the face, right? Popularizing that. You get, Machida following after that. You get shout out to, I think Justin Buchholz hit Steve Lopez at a Superior Cage Combat show that same year, right? It's like it erupts into space, right? And even before the front kick, Anderson gets credit for the tie clinch, right? And you really look back at Yves Edwards, and even in the NH, you go back to even his '90s fights, like pre UFC's NHB fights, right? The bare knuckle ones. And he's hitting tie clinches there, right? He's messing guys up there. And of course, he does it to like guys like Matt Serra in the UFC, Rich Clemente in the fight that I just referenced. But it's like little things. Like with Matt Serra, he, is able to hit him with the uppercut, the grappler changing levels in, and Matt still kind of pushes through, even though he's kind of dropped by it and goes for the takedown. And you'll still see Yves, like whether he hits a guy with the uppercut successfully and sprawls, or he commits the crime where he overthrows with his left because he's a southpaw. That's his rear, and just like overthrowing with your right, you're going to get taken down. That's the old adage, right? But he was so quick and so smooth in transition. He had such good hips. He could transition right to a sprawl, and not just a sprawl like in that Matt Serra sequence where he drops him with the uppercut and then sprawls on the reshot or the plan B shot, I should say, from Serra. He's parlaying that exchange into. You also see him grab a wrist and use like early wrist control and use it like a cross wrist ride to get around to Serra's back and like give him a couple good shots. And he realizes he's grappling with Matt Serra, who's a legit grappler, by the way. People don't realize like how good Matt Serra was and how good his accolades were back in the day. And he backs off smartly, right? But he's just kind of showing that savvy. Sakuraba obviously is somebody who at least I like to really credit with like really popularizing, Kimura traps. Being an early guy, and Yves Edwards was doing it at the same time in the same organization in Pride. I think it was against Mishima, a guy who Kenny Florian, people are more familiar with as a guy who Kenny Florian beat in his early UFC career. Mishima, who was a good grappler himself, I believe, like a leg lock guy. And you see Yves Edwards in Pride organization hitting Kimura traps and like hitting some early stuff like that. He wasn't, he's a southpaw, but he was able to fight orthodox and actually switch stance a lot early in his career, and could kind of seamlessly switch stances. And as far as transitioning, punching to kicking range to clinching range to different stances. Again, those little intricacies of offensive to defensive, parlaying defense into offense in those wrestling and grappling transitions. The guy was nicknamed with the Thug Jitsu style for a reason. He was more deceptively good at grappling than given credit for. So, hipster pick Yves Edwards.
That Josh Thompson knockout, man, where he had his back and like Matt returns him, Thompson gets up and he tries to like run out, and then Edwards just boots him in the face as soon as he turns around.
Yeah,
that's one of the knockouts in MMA that like if you ask me to just think of a knockout, that's probably going to come to mind. Also, Yves Edwards stands out for me for the single leg knees.
Yes.
A guy would get in on his hips with a single leg. He would fight for wrist control and whizzer on one side, and then while he's hopping back and they're trying to like pressure him downwards, he's trying to hop back to keep his balance. He'll leap in the air and knee him in the face. He's done this quite a few times. He did it against a couple of the guys in his UFC run, but I think he knocked out, was it Edson Berto with it in Elite FC?
Yeah, yep, in Elite XC, yep, yep.
Yeah, that was not
crazy.
Something I'd ever seen before when that happened.
Yeah, Faber got a lot of credit because he was like the first like air quote popular guy in that like whole this isn't Fox. This is like from UFC WEC to UFC transition. I remember seeing Faber do it and getting a lot of credit, and even Faber was like, Yves Edwards is the first guy to do that, man.
Yeah.
But like, obviously California kid's super popular, right? But like, yeah, Yves Edwards was like, it's funny how many techniques like so many popular fighters didn't like. This dude who doesn't get talked about over here is like he was like doing it first in this very same organizations in, just as competitive of divisions, right? Especially even back then.
Edwards looked like such a modern striker in like the early 2010s when he was fighting that we forgot how early he started. His career started in like 96 or something, didn't it?
Yeah, and that's why
the year I was born, man. That's insane.
And that's what gets it over the hill for me, because it's in one sense it's more challenging to go back and pick a fighter to contend in this category, right? But in another sense, it's like when you're talking about fighters like Yves Edwards, it's fighters like that who were able to figure it out back then. They stood out head over heels. I forget the saying that I'm messing up here, but they definitely stood out a lot more from their contemporaries. It wasn't as saturated,
Yeah,
But
absolutely. One of the pioneers.
and I like that Josh Thompson reference because I just rewatched that, and that was another example that is started off by him overthrowing a left, I think, and then Thompson going to shoot and actually getting in pretty decent, but then he's got good hips, defends, and then doesn't just defend, repummels for an over under. Then doesn't just get the over under, uses it to the underhook to shuck by, and then would have gotten a suplex if Josh Thompson didn't. He didn't get that full leg tie thing, and I did this the other day. I was like, I felt really good about it, and I heard someone whisper, "It's like, oh, it's because he's got wrestling shoes on." But like when someone tries to lift you, hoist you, you kind of vine their leg to prevent from getting slammed. So it wasn't like a full slam, but it was enough to kind of create that scramble, or again, kind of off the brakes, and like that's one of my favorite types of transition fighters too. Fighters who are just really good off the break. I'll definitely be mentioning one who didn't make my list, but he's one of the first fighters who comes to mind, and he was right on the cusp for me. But yeah, talk about striking off the break. That's one of the best ones out flying, committing head kick there. It is
Edwards
Josh
is really
Thompson.
good at like kind of striking off the collar tie too. Like he would grab the double collar tie and look for the knees, but the natural reaction to that is to straighten up and like pull backwards, so you're not bending over to get hit by the knees. And if they did that and he kind of lost the collar tie, he'd right away go into punches.
Yeah, he was really good. He was really good with that. He would even do timing change ups. Like I forget this one guy. He wasn't a big name that he fought, but he knocks him out with a like a Superman punch head kick combo. Because like he's like just throwing like jabs, head kick, jab two, head kick, from southpaw, and then he just randomly just like. Because whenever, even like really good fighters who we'll probably talk about in this episode, did the Superman punch. It was really just a drawn out and dramatic thing, right? And when you see Edwards do it, shameless plug to my highlight, especially because I can't figure out this fighter's name, but it's in there. He just like does like a speed change on it, like a Mark Hunt style speed change, except it's a flamboyant move, and it's just snap, and it's just right down the pike and hit and just drops him. It's crazy. And this was probably like 2002, 2001, or something like that, like over 2 decades ago. But yeah, that's my number 5, Ryan. Did you have a hipster spot for your number 5? I wouldn't be surprised if all your picks are hipster picks. Let's be honest here, Ryan. But what do you got for your number 5, my friend?
I have at least one massive hipster pick somewhere on here, but 5 is not the one. This is a super normie pick. Someone that I'm sure all our listeners were expecting to see on this list, but probably weren't expecting to see so low. My number 5 is Georges St-Pierre.
Nice. Okay. All right. GSP. Let's go.
GSP obviously needs no introduction here, but he is probably the best example of how a very strong meat and potatoes boxing game synergizes really well with level changes. Obviously, his whole thing was using his jab and his jab feints to condition opponents to reach out to parry that, or to when he would change levels and jab the body. The more he does that, the more he feints the level changes, the more his opponents get desensitized to what he's doing, and then the level change turns right into a takedown. He was amazing, better than almost anyone in MMA at timing reactive takedowns. Whenever you try to step in, the thing about GSP is that he never had like super layered defense, but his defense was that he would just duck in on your hips and put you on your ass. Anytime you want to step in and hit him, he's going to change levels onto your hips and you're going for a ride. Amazing at chaining off those. He would flash the jab in your face, feint you out of your pants, and then if you do catch him going for a takedown and you catch an underhook or a whizzer, he's immediately ready to transition to a knee tap, go from a high crotch to a double leg. Once he started, he would never stop until you broke contact. There was some really nice moments where he'd do like little intercepting counters into takedowns too. One in the second Matt Serra fight where Serra kind of lunged forward with a long right hand, and GSP just flipped like a really tiny left hook, not a hurting strike, but just enough to distract him, like draws attention upstairs, and then while he's still moving backwards, changes levels and just lets Serra his hips collide onto GSP's takedown. He doesn't even have to move an inch, just ducks his hips down, and Sarah's momentum does the takedown for him. So the interplay between his boxing and his takedowns was sublime. Something that anyone in MMA who's like, if you want to take guys down, he's the one you want to watch. But once he got to the ground, he was incredible at working in transitions there too. He's one of the best examples about how you can use your strikes in the ground to facilitate positional control. He had a very detailed system of like what kind of little sub positions he was looking for in guard and half guard. And when he's in full guard, he wants to get his hands inside yours so he can control your posture. He can prevent you from like extending your hand to block his strikes with his shoulders. So he would like punch wide up on the head to get you to lift your shoulder up and your elbow out and block it. Then as soon as you do that, he'd swim inside. He would kind of transition between those collar ties in guard, the like can opener, where he like pulls your head in and elbows you, and cross faces, where he's sticking his forearm across your face and like forcing your head down. And if you watch him in anybody's guard, the way he mixes his ground and pound with his little like swims in to find different sub positions, it's better than pretty much anyone I've seen. One other thing I really loved from him was his reshots. This isn't something I've seen very much at all in MMA, but when guys tried to turn into him, he would look to get a front headlock, and then instead of trying to hold on to the front headlock or choking them and like risking losing the position, he would just let them slowly stand up and use the front headlock to just kind of halt their momentum for a second, and then just shoot back into on their hips as soon as their posture got up. Because you're never thinking about defending the leg as you're standing up from the front headlock.
Yeah. You don't see that much. Like, even the closest kind of just the same idea, ironically, is a heavyweight example that's coming to mind. But that's because it was a DC touring with a guy like Derek Lewis who could just do whatever he wanted to him. But I think he went front headlock to ankle pick as far as the high low.
Oh yeah. There was also the John Jones inside trip from front headlock against Rampage when he was just like fucking with him and showing off.
Oh, that was brutal. Yeah, that was just like. That was that was brutal to watch. I remember watching that. I don't just remember that reference. I remember that reference live. You know, you're like, oh,
yep.
Not that I thought Rampage could win that even at that point. You know, but I was just like, it was just hard to watch.
Like, is this necessary? Do you really got to go there?
Yeah, like I remember even at that point, as much of a fanboy as I was like, yeah, I'm not buying the whole muscle farm training camp in Denver is going to make a difference deal. Remember that was like the whole thing before that. Like,
yep.
And that was probably like, sadly, that was probably the last time he got in like that kind of shape, his like actual good shape.
Yeah.
Because then it was just like BJ Penn style, where they were just like fighting the motivation to, you know, train. But
yeah, no. Just like his coach is running after him, trying to track him down, be like, Rampage, come into the gym, come on.
Yeah. But you didn't have to worry about that with GSP, and that is why, you know, and he had that kind of like old school, like, speaking of Marco Huas, you know, like on his off, you know, he was going to Brazil to train jiu-jitsu. He was, you know, wrestling with the Canadian national team, going down to Jackson's when he was splitting camps there still. And when there was that like actual, like the prime of their stable, right? They still had like everyone from like Rashad Evans to like, you know.
The sport killers, as it were.
Yeah, that's right. Diego Sanchez actually still had some cells over there at that point.
Oh,
I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm like, right. But yeah, that's a great reference. George St. Pierre is I had him as my number 2, and I could see people having him as their number 1, and we'll get to that. And shouts to those people who did. Again, a very valid pick. I think you just kind of have to have him on this list for sure, right?
Yeah.
You know, I hate to say you have to, but like it's your list, but you got to have him somewhere on there. And yeah, his transition game. You mentioned his guard. That's one thing I was going to mention, just the guard passing and almost the systemization to it all, from side mount to inside the guard and everything kind of in between. He just like, it looked like it was drilled like 1,000 times over, you know, like he didn't have to think about it. And of course the jab, and then also kind of, you know, say what you will about the cherry picking with the Bisping fight at middleweight, but you know, hey man, he kind of starts to tie everything together in that fight, you know, from his Colitis karate boxing, because he was kind of bringing back his own variation of that, right? Because like the first GSP that I really like, he's very like, you know, uh, pre/during first title run GSP, right? He's got a lot more kicks and kind of that more, you know, karate kickboxing style to him, right? And then he
Before
goes
his
more,
stance had like kind of neutered his left hook.
yeah. And then he kind of like, you know, I haven't rewatched the fight, so forgive me in a minute, but with the Bisping one in particular, 217. But it almost feels like he starts kind of tying everything together, you know? And then obviously he really ties it together with melding his vaunted ground and pound and top game to being able to actually show, you know, some opportunism that involved transitioning, right? You know, Bisping turns to give the back and he gets that choke. And you know, and you compare that to like the Dan Hardy portion of his career where he could dominate a guy for 25 minutes and not find the, you know, the Kimura, there, right? You know, so it's just like seeing that, like, oh wow, that was really cool. So yeah, you definitely cannot deny GSP a spot on this list. So good
You
shout
remember
there.
the clip of GSP backstage after that fight getting like upset that he couldn't finish him and like insisting Don Hare like teach me how to finish this.
Yep, absolutely.
Speaks to his insane dedication and drive. And I feel the need to explain why I have GSP at not 5 and higher,
Okay,
and why
sure.
I have GSP at 5 and not higher. Because like you said, you absolutely could put him anywhere from like 3 to 1 on this list without any issue. For me, I think that a lot of the guys I'm going to mention later tend to work more comfortably in like deeper transitional exchanges than GSP. And a big part of this was that GSP's wrestling was so sublime and exceptional, like obviously better than anyone else on this list, that the deep transitions just didn't happen a whole lot for him. So as a consequence, his brilliance in transitions on the feet kind of mostly goes one way in support of like setting up his wrestling. Whereas if he can't get his wrestling going, then he's not as good at either breaking with strikes or using takedown to set up like striking combinations, or using transitioning between like grappling to striking back to grappling to kind of like drown his opponent deeper in those transitions. For example, the Hendricks fight where he was kind of locked out from his wrestling, that really shut down his transitional offense, and Hendricks was able to pretty comprehensively get the better of him there.
Great, yeah, that's a great point, and you know that's actually kind of the exact reasons on why, you know, why even though he's worth a shout later on in the episode, but why perhaps another welterweight champion didn't make my list, you know. But
yeah, I can see that.
You know, that's a similar kind of credit, especially as far as the depth goes, you know, and that could be due to, I credit that more to that person's high percentage choices, as well. Great shout. All right, so let's go to number 4. So I've done my, you know, paid my penance for the, you know, the fight site or any of the hipster analysts out there. I mean that in a loving way, of course. But as far as heavyweight hate goes, I definitely to the point where I get accused of that as well. And it's great because then I see other like podcasts, like shout out to, it's actually no longer, but the Couchside Judges podcast, where one of their best ideas ever, they're mainly about judging, of course, but one of their best ideas ever, Ryan, was that unless it's for a number 1 contender or a championship fight, heavyweight fight should just be 1 round. Not even no 5 round, just 1 round.
No elaboration needed. I'm absolutely on board.
There's
literally no downside to that.
Like we cut down on broadcast times as well. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I feel like they used to, like 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe it's longer and I'm like forgetting time. I feel like there used to be good heavyweight main events, like Mark Hunt and Bigfoot. Even where Doom and Brown wasn't that bad. But like I don't recall heavyweight fights being any good because they go longer nowadays. Mm-hmm. Maybe the heavyweights are worse. They're signing worse heavyweights. I don't know.
It was a theory I've had on this show, but I got to pay credit to another show. Shout out to my guy Brad Kastrick on the MMA Analysis podcast. And they're mainly a gambling podcast, Ryan. But one of their favorite betting angles that the books have caught on to are heavyweight overs, and they call this bet "Fatty's gonna fatty." And how they kind of size it up, especially when you get like really fat heavyweights. My guy Brad will call it the T-shirt in the pull division. But the ironic part about his long-standing joke is, since, as you've seen, since this scouting and the recruitment process, since not just the ESPN, but particularly since the pandemic, right? The cruel joke is that, for Brad, is that the whole division is basically the T-shirt in the pole division, right? Like even when,
Yeah.
even it's like A, why do you think John Jones decided now is the time to move up to heavyweight, right? And B, when he did move up, everyone was making fun of his physique, and like the man was just trying to fit in. Like
Hey, man,
that's
it's
the
all
heavyweight
part of a
division
30-year
now.
plan.
Yeah, like everyone's like, look at John. Like, what do you mean? To me, I see a committed heavyweight. You know, he's committed to the gig. Anyways, I say that all to say and to praise a kind of a portly heavyweight, but I'm going with Fedor Emelianenko here, baby.
Hell yeah.
And I know I don't have to justify this pick with you, but Fedor, of course, is the legendary Russian fighter before Khabib, who was hailed for his winning streak, even though his wasn't as clean. But again, for every Kosaka cut, there's a Gleason T-bow, right? So let's tomato, right, Ryan? Not even Kosaka, sorry, but you know what I'm saying. Like, listen here, Fedor was essentially. I remember the I Dominate. It was like the NBA, like the NBA logo, but it was like Fedor. You had like a guy with like a portly like dad bod, and it was just his outline, and it just said like I Dominate, and it was like looked like the it was like somewhere between the NBA logo and the iPod logo. It was great, and this guy was a legend, but he was an undersized heavyweight, and perhaps it's kind of like the BJ Penn thing with me, where like. If a fighter, was balding with a bit of a belly, and I don't have the balding part, thank goodness. At least I don't have that going against me. But nonetheless, it's that everyman feel, right? And you get really endeared with these fighters, and then when they're actually good fighters, it becomes pretty fucking cool, right? And you watch them like style on people, right? That they shouldn't, maybe be styling on, right? And even though you really couldn't move up like BJ because Fedor was already competing at heavyweight. Again, he was a small heavyweight and was even like taking on, super heavyweight matches with the, going Nogueira style, but like fighting Hongman Choi, and doing kind of circus acts like that as well, which I know didn't really help his legacy. But when you actually break down the technique that he was using, whether it was the armbar on a guy like a Hongman Choi and being able to, even just transitioning to an armbar counts for a big transition points as far as heavyweight MMA goes. But more realistically, one of my favorite parts. I mean, you really could go through a lot of it at all. As far as one of the best heavyweight fights ever against Crow Cop, and seeing him being able to operate at kicking range, countering, striking in, and where he really makes his money in transition for me is the clinch. Of course, he was a Sambo guy, but his I believe his lineage and stuff they're strong. Obviously, Sambo's got, it's like a next door neighbor to kind of judo. If we got like the martial arts neighborhood, right? Like Sambo and judo, they don't live too far away from each other. So this isn't anything crazy to say. But Fedor obviously had a lot of judo skills, and he really incorporated a lot of those exercises into his regiment. You watch those old Fedor, military fatigue highlights. He was always doing the similar thing that you would see Rousey and a lot of other judokas doing with the with the bands, as far as those hip throws and tosses. And even though he wasn't doesn't have this crazy highlight reel of a bunch of uchimatas and like hip tosses, it was the fact that he would just use it for momentum. He would just use it to kind of break things up, whether people were trying to grapple or push him against the ropes. And he would just use that kind of basic, and you'll see some fighters do it, and I almost feel like they're doing it by accident, which is kind of upsetting, because I'm like, Fedor has laid the blueprint. Like, you don't need to go I still believe in judo. It's still real to me, damn it. Like, no, you don't need to completely sell out. You just need some decent understanding of how to get that kind of hip bump momentum, whether you have one one over tie or an underhook, just being able to get a hip in there and kind of bump off that momentum. And you can use that to strike, to separate, to re-wrestle and re-clinch if you want to do that. And because of that and having those kind of mechanics and deceptive mechanics, despite being undersized, despite not having the stability of maybe ring posts, or they did have ring posts in Pride, but you know what I mean, like the cage, I should say, or like an octagon or something like that. Like he was able to do a lot of quiet improv in his just simple hip bumping to varying degrees of success. And the way he would transition off that, as basic as it sounds, it's still not something you see done as consistently or with the intention I believe as it should. And he's obviously really good on his back or on top as well.
Yeah. Fedor's my number 3.
Oh, nice.
We're just about the same there. Yeah, Sambo is basically transitional offense, the sport, and Fedor was the first fighter to really show fully how useful Sambo is for MMA. And honestly, probably the first truly great transitional fighter in MMA history. In many ways that still haven't really been like equaled or surpassed. His classic overshooting right hand into an underhook throw, where he would shoot a long right hand, step his rear foot forward into the underhook and toss you on your ass. That has become one of the most consistent takedowns, one of the most consistent setups, both for upper body throws and for shot takedowns that you see anywhere in MMA. And he was the first one to really popularize that. Like you mentioned, whenever someone tries to get him in a static clinch hold, they try to suck him in with underhooks and pin him to the fence, or they try to like grab a hold of him while he's flurrying to stabilize and like prevent him from continuing to whoop them upside the head 50 times. He'd immediately just switch his hips, grab an overhook and like wrench their arm, threaten a hip toss, and even if it didn't land, he could just snap right back into a punch. There was a great sequence against Crow Cop where he threatened an overhook throw and then broke it with a left hook.
Yes. Yep. I pictured that one earlier too. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Another thing I really like about him, a really underutilized weapon in pretty much any combat sport, he used like little shoves and bumps really, really well. He would like launch in with the right hand and then just let his body collide with the other guy, rather than like try and pull it back or like duck his head in the pocket or whatever. He would just step in and like launch himself at the guy. And when you do that, it takes away their space to counter and immediately knocks them off balance. So you would see Fedor's hand flying at you faster than you've ever seen any heavyweight punch before. And then he'd be like body checking you off balance and then hitting you 3 times. Super underutilized weapon in any sport that like you see from a lot of great fighters, but not a whole lot from people who aren't great fighters. Giorgio Petrosian in kickboxing is another guy who uses like really little nudges and shoves to move guys around where he wants them and to prevent them from like getting offense off in certain positions.
Yep.
And of course, with Fedor's top game, there's a few guys who like really kind of defined the MMA meta on top that we see now, and Fedor was one of the big ones. You have the passing progression of guys like GSP and Damian Maia, and Fedor was the guy who like really taught everybody how to do ground and pound. He was probably the first one to really like systematize the kind of damage over control view of MMA top game, where back when he started, when you get past when you pass somebody's knee line, you get your you're in full guard and you step your leg outside theirs, and now they can no longer post their foot on your hip to push off. Most guys see that and think, I can like get to headquarters position or like start tripoding, sinking my weight down and passing the side control. Fedor saw that your foot wasn't able to post on his hip on that side, and it meant he could smash you in the face.
Yeah.
And the once he did that, like it doesn't just end there. You have to make some kind of like regarding motion or like defensive movement to recover your guard. And while that's happening, all the while is giving him a chance to continue hitting you. and then it's going to make your reaction more rushed, and it makes it easier for him to just pass again. And now that's something we see like a lot of guys try to emulate, and he was like really the big one that kind of pioneered that.
Yeah, man. I mean, he was shutting down Nogueira in Nogueira's prime, not letting him get to his, sit-ups, his deep half, much less his triangle or his armbar setups from the guard, which, again, you might think those were low percentage, but Nogueira, that's how he was known. He was the first heavyweight really doing that fluidly, and you really don't see any of that. And, staying in the theme of transitions, I would argue that this counts for what we're talking about too, as far as transition goes, because the key a lot of transitions is being able to combine defense with offense, and that's what he's doing there, even on the ground. He's preventing where his hand posts and positioning are. He's preventing any kind of leveraging sit-ups or submission attempts from Nogueira, whilst keeping himself in the home position and his base on point. For striking and delivering power. So even though it's not like a flyweight scramble transition there, the fact that he's constantly parlaying defense with offense, no matter what phase that he's in, does count for something, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so that's great. I feel much better that he was your number 3. So let's fill in the gap there. We have your number 5 at GSP. We have your number 3 at Fedor. Who's in between, Ryan? Who do you have for your number 4?
4 is Frankie Edgar.
Nice. All right. This
Another
goes
name
perfect.
I'm sure a lot of people expected to see on here. Frankie, we talked about Fedor kind of systematizing the ground and pound stuff. Frankie was one of the first people to do that for like boxing footwork and boxing head movement.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he had the classic knee tap, where he would just rush forward and like slam his open palm onto your chest and just lift your knee up. And you'd go flying backwards.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Classic. Yep.
And the way he worked into that, he was constantly feinting his jab, trying to get you to jab back at him so he could follow your retraction back with his entry. Or he would come in with like a double dipping jab where he dips his head offline so your counter, his head sails just under or outside your counter. And then he does that a couple times. You see it, and you like want to plant and try to throw back at him to back him off. And this time he ducks down head at chest level, slams his palm into your chest, picks your knee up, and you go flying backwards.
Great one.
He was one of the first guys I've seen really excel at like picking up shots, not to finish, but to drop them with punching combinations. The Gray Maynard trilogy really stands out for that. After the second really hard fight, the thing that got Edgar the win in the fourth fight was his transitional offense, where Gray smashed him around in the first round again, and then Edgar got back into it with his boxing, with his like circling footwork, his lateral movement, and Maynard had a hard time tracking him down. Then in the fourth round, Maynard kind of gets frustrated and rushes in. Edgar ducks down onto his hips for a reactive takedown, grabs like a seatbelt and like circles around a little bit, and then as Maynard's popping up from the takedown, thinking he defended it, he catches just a tiny little right hook in his face that shuts his lights off.
Yeah. That was so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love Gray too. That was hard to watch going for Gray. That was such a beautiful and unexpected. The effect of it. The effect of it. It was like, whoa.
Especially after like how the previous rounds had gone and how their last fight went. Like Edgar was the guy who was gonna beat him with grit and heart and determination by like outlasting him and like patiently outboxing him for 5 rounds. And then just to see him do that. And it was kind of like the perfect moment against Maynard too, because Maynard was a guy built to give him a lot of problems. And Edgar found that like one little gap in transitional offense where he excelled and Maynard couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
And as soon as he found that, he exploited it until it was over. Another thing I really like about Edgar that's kind of unique, you don't see a whole lot from other guys, is that he did a really good job kicking off his failed shots too. A lot of times he would come in level change kind of upright with his head like at chest level, either shooting into an underhook or like shooting for a high seat belt, or with that little knee tap where he slams his palm on your chest. And then as guys were backing up, if they were out of punching range, he'd just like throw a switch kick or punt their leg.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that. So I had Edgar as my number 3 here. So his parlays perfectly into it, right? Is your number 4?
Yeah.
And as we're talking, I'm like, I feel like maybe Edgar should have been my number 2. Not as much as, even though I agree with the reasons why you said you could justify GSP for being lower on this list, which is totally fine. But more so because I'm realizing that, like, as much of a BJ Penn, fan I was growing up and a mark, right? Like, there really wasn't much comparable. Like, I could really take and amplify from his game, Like, boxing and wrestling
Yeah,
were probably my
you're not going
weakest
to be
things.
BJ Penn.
Yeah, my boxing and wrestling were my weakest things, and the best thing I could do was, like, which I can still, manage to surprise myself sometimes, maybe take it back from a weird position. That's about it. There wasn't really anything replicable, about BJ Penn's game, right? He
What, you're
was,
going to like fold yourself in half and like
yeah,
take somebody's back from octopus guard and full guard like you did on Matt Hughes?
yeah, yeah. So even as a, 5'9" Hawaiian, I'm like, no, I need something more realistic. I need some white guys to imitate. I'm just kidding. But no, seriously, I mean, it was Jim Miller and Frankie Edgar were just like really like huge. I pulled from. I talked about Jim Miller before because there wasn't a lot of southpaws, and when I was getting ready for my first amateur fight, I was going against a heavy hitting wrestler, and Jim Miller recently fought Kamal Shalarus, right? So that fight was in the banks a lot, playing to get ideas, right? This is early days, right, folks? It's not, right. This is well over a decade ago. Okay, like a decade and a half ago. We're talking about. Um, but Frankie Edgar was another guy, and I think even in that fight, I do a move where because I'm just trying, and my takedowns are so bad and they're so obvious. Um, and I go for a fake shot, and then he's out of range, so I just come up with a kick because I saw Frankie do it to BJ. And you mentioned that knee tap, right? That's like a really good takedown for open stance if you're a southpaw, if you're going
Yeah.
against a southpaw, or you are a southpaw going against orthodox, because that front leg's right there, so you can just kind of do a feint or a lazy jab and kind of or a change level jab, and that lead hand can kind of just fade down to that knee, and your follow up too can go to the chest, right? And you've got that same takedown that Ryan was describing. That's part of Edgar's arsenal. So. Well, that one was often coached to me a lot, right? Because that's just like an easy gimme for like a non-athletic southpaw. Like, oh, that's like right there for you, right? Like just you know, just change your level and go on that one, right?
You barely have to move.
Yeah, yeah. It's a really So I was like, okay, like I put that in, and even like basic things, like, and I still find myself doing it when I'm resetting and circling on the outside, like. It, again, I did theater and stuff, so I like mimicking on all levels, folks. So maybe it's not that much of a surprise, but like, yeah, I do voices on here, right? Like, but yeah, like I would like I feel like I'm just mimicking it, like just the way the hand motion and the shoulders and the head.
It's
And
so
then
distinctive too.
it's so distinct, and I would just do it every time, but I would use that because it's such a good flow, and it would remind me to kind of move my head going in. And even like early sparring days, I remember just doing that, like circling, moving, and keeping that same movement and moving in the head. And maybe like one of the coaches was walking by because it's like a big sparring room at Couture's, right? And like, oh, good head movement, Dan. I'm like, oh wow, see, I'm tricking. I'm actually tricking the coaches to look at. They think I know what I'm doing now. I'm just imitating Edgar over here. but like, like. And it's not that I'm an Edgar hater. Like I think I've only, pretty much speaking Edgar pretty favorably through all the years in this podcast. So it's not like anybody would throw or suspect anything of me. It's just kind of surprising that, on paper, you'd expect me to be such a big BJ Penn fan. But like, I really took more and studied more from guys like Edgar's game. And to add to the transition things as far as like re-wrestling and reshots go, GSP, you gave a good example. Is that what I love, something, and again, I've probably gotten to do the uglier version of this for sure because I love playing guys from Turtle. So, but I always think of Edgar versus Uriah Faber, where he gets the initial shot, but regardless of the success of the takedown, Faber's obviously a really good scrambler. And Beef, Faber, not just a good scrambler, but because he's not afraid to give his back, right? He'll go turtle, right? And you see in that fight where on the second shots, your first shot, variating success, Faber goes turtle, And then Frankie does the thing where he did it to BJ too a bit, I think in some instances as well. But like when the guy kind of goes turtle, kind of ass in the air, like more of a tripod than a turtle, right? They're trying to get up, and he's like kind of rear on the waist, and you'll see maybe fighters usually stand up from there, start fighting the hands, separate, and before they can get any of that going, Edgar kind of will shift to one side or the other, change the angle, and just recreate a double from it. And just redouble. And it just sounds simple, seems simple in practice, yet you don't see people do that. And it was a lot of those second takedowns and second that really started to crush his opponents, their confidence. Even if they couldn't hold him there, it was like, geez, can I just get a beat on this guy? I don't know if you know what I'm talking about for that specific example, but that one's always burned in my head, his reshots.
That one doesn't come to mind immediately, but I remember Edgar doing similar things to that. He was really great at using kind of when guys were on the bottom and trying to turn into him to stand up. He was great at using like little things that would just slow their get up for a little bit, so he could have time to strike off of it or prepare himself to exploit it as they stood up, like cradles.
Yeah.
I can't remember a specific fight where he did this, but I remember Edgar doing it in the past, where they would turn into him, he would cradle, lock around the head and the legs, and then they're probably gonna get up anyway, but it's gonna be slower, and they're not gonna be able to explode up. So you have that time to knee them in the body or hit them in the face on the way up.
He was also really good at using that.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
It's like it was early Edgar. Early Edgar did more of that, right? Like I remember that. Yeah, that was early Edgar.
That was more of an early Edgar thing.
Yeah.
He would smash guys from the front headlock when they were getting up to. Guys try to stand up along the cage. He just grabs a front headlock, lets them get up slowly, and then punches them in the face over and over while they do it.
Yeah.
He hit that, that like kind of leaping Osotogari that everybody's doing now. Edgar hit that against Benson Henderson. I think he might have been the first one I saw do that.
That's right. Oh man, was that their Denver fight or Japan fight? I can't remember,
so.
But yeah.
I think it was the Denver one.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great
now
shout.
Everybody's doing that like years later. You saw it from Zabit a lot. Mateus Nicolau. It's a popular thing now.
Yeah, I mean, really good and again, like GSP, he even had, despite, having a lot of decisions on his record at the higher levels, but like, from I know that was a weird BJ, the third fight, but like, you see him like, beat guys up with their ground and pound, or, I don't know why Matt Veach is coming to mind, not the greatest example, but, if guys would give their neck or anything like that, like, it wasn't like, Frankie couldn't finish, he could finish in multiple ways. It just,
yeah. Hell, he finished the hell out of Yair Rodriguez.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he did. Yeah. I just think a lot of common factors, especially with like the way I approach the list and the common threads I found is that there's a lot of Kavanaugh, a lot of keep it flowy for a lot of these really good transition fighters, right?
Absolutely.
And for better or worse, sometimes you can, I talk about, maybe lower level or unfocused fighter, like it's a really random example, but this comes to mind a lot. Maybe not lately with her last fight, but usually in general, Andrea KGB Lee. She's like is like so scrambly. She'll like scramble herself into position and like kind of flow. She'll flow her way out of a position just as fast as she flows her way into it. So sometimes having that mentality, that that foundation that we spoke of to be a good transition fighter, like that's why it can be so hard, because forget finishing. It's just even kind of having a focus attack, because sometimes you can get, and I feel like, I don't know if it's because of my ADD or, have an edible before practice. I don't know what it is, but sometimes I feel like I'm like, losing track of the finishes. Like you're just like, you're just like, you can kind of get too transition happy and this and that. So I don't know. I think, you can fall into the trapping of grading with too hard of a curve, whether it's a GSP or not, or, as far as like decisions or whatever, but it's hard to lose track of the forest of the trees, because you could really do that. Like the fact that these guys are able, or gals are able to, focus that transition game and win rounds, win fights, have an actual process and approach. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but it's harder than it sounds.
You totally are. Like a big part of it is like intention and initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Like guys like Edgar and GSP, they're not just accepting what the other guy wants. They have specific things in mind that they're looking for when they do these. And another key is like initiative, where if you're constantly reacting to what your opponent's doing, then you're going to be a step behind in transition. Whereas if you're looking to create the opportunities yourself, Edgar was really good at like using his transitions reactively too, in a way. Like he would kind of catch guys coming in and then duck on their hips. Against Benson Henderson, there's a couple moments where like he was trying to catch kicks all fight in both fights. He could barely do anything with them. Henderson would just like almost do the splits, and then like Edgar was too far away because he's tiny to like drop it and punch him, so he'd just be kind of confused. But there were a few moments where he'd grab the kick and then he'd kind of frame off Henderson's face and turn him towards his back, ending up in an almost like half Nelson position, then just nail him with a punch from there. But even though Edgar is doing a lot of those things reactively, he's taking the initiative in a way by like drawing out what he wants the other guy to throw, or by like anticipating their next move. It's never something where they're letting the other guy set the pace and just going with their transitions. They're making them react to something and then using their reaction to quickly move to something else. Yep.
Excellent sum up on Edgar's game there. Man, really, I mean, this is a real good list for Edgar, regardless where you put him. I think he really shines here. You know, this is really where
this is the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. This is what made Edgar, man. So if you're a Frankie Edgar fan, hopefully you appreciate that, because he definitely deserves a spot on this list. But Ryan, we've got 4 of mine left, only 3 of yours on paper, so that leaves us at your number 2. Who do you have for your number 2?
My number 2 is, have we gone through your 4 and 3 yet?
So yeah, my 4 was Fedor, and then you sunk my battleships with 3 and 2, because that was Edgar and St. Pierre, which, by the way, I feel like I need to maybe put Edgar at number 2 and my St. Pierre is number 3, the more we talked about Edgar there. But yeah, that's where I'm at. So I've got 4 battleships sunk, and you've only got 3. So let's even up and see what your number 2 is.
Well, I didn't exhaust my hipster pick early because I had it saved for my number 2 spot.
Okay.
Number 2, if you follow me on Twitter, you probably would have expected this guy to come up at some point. If you don't, you might not know who he is. My number 2 pick is Edward Vartanian.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Okay, yes, yeah. Nice. Very nice.
For those who need a quick refresher on who he is, Edward Vartanian, he spent his entire career in Russia fighting in ACB and ACA. 2 promotions that are not super well known, but they have a very high level of talent. He is their current lightweight champion, and he's been active for about a decade at this point, so he's nearing the end of his career. He's 25-4. He's beaten a lot of very great competition that could compete with high-level UFC lightweights. And in terms of his transition game, he has the biggest thing that stands out about Vartanian to me is that he's the best I've ever seen in MMA about hitting very low effort takedowns because of his striking setups. And what I mean by that is if you set up a takedown perfectly, if you like time a right hand and duck into the guy's hips at the very right moment, finishing the takedown becomes a lot easier. And Vartanian is incredible with his striking setups, but he also has a lot of kind of unique low effort takedown options. So he'll throw a right hand and drift forward and let his rear leg just kind of sneak outside the other guy's leg and just sweep their foot out from under them as they back up from his right hand.
Yeah.
It's super consistent for him. He even did this against Demiris Magulov in their weird little mixed rules kickboxing fight. And it's like the lowest effort takedown you can hit in MMA. You can repeat that over and over. It doesn't cost any energy, really. You don't have to like struggle for a double leg. You're just stepping forward, letting your leg drift, and then they trip over it. He does outside trips the same way, where he'll throw his right hand and then like just hook around their calf and pull it out. And he has very good outside footwork that he uses to like kind of confuse guys on his setups. So he'll like go into a square stance and skip around the side for a bit, and then suddenly he'll be back in his stance, throwing that right hand and drifting outside for the foot sweep. He's really good at converting kicks to takedowns. This is something that GSP was really great about with leg kicks. Very hard to leg kick because he would widen his base, let the kick right up his leg, and then just knee tap you.
Yeah.
Vartanian is really good at doing something similar with body kicks. I wonder if he had some kind of Sanda experience, because this is something I've seen a lot in MMA. But what he does when guys try to kick the open side, so like the open pocket of the ribs, the right side on an orthodox fighter, it's hard to catch kicks off the open side because it doesn't really ride up the back the way kicking the other side does. It kind of just like bounces off neatly off that pocket. Vartanian will close the open side by just letting his rear hip and shoulder drift forward, so they end up kicking into his back, and it rides up. You can grab the leg and then sweep their leg out for a takedown.
Yeah.
And so this is only about his striking into his wrestling so far, but he also has brilliant clinch entries and striking out of the clinch.
Yes.
When you see him come in, he'll come in with like those long right hands that he uses to set up his foot sweeps, or like a leaping left hook. Whenever somebody ducks, his hand is converted into like his missed punch goes right into a collar tie or a forearm frame across the face, and right away he's throwing a knee or trying to snap their head down into a knee, or like there's some brilliant moments in like some of his earlier ACB fights where he comes in with a couple punches and then anticipates a counter. He ducks under like a counter jab or left hook, and then gets outside their stance with like a collar tie or a wrap around their head in the clinch. And now the guy's like not even looking at him. They're off balance. Vartanian's off to the side, and he can slam in some knees or punches without them being aware. He's great at converting missed punches into underhooks or collar ties. Whenever he slips inside a right hand, his hand goes right into an underhook, and he's immediately ready to wrestle off those. And like we've talked about with Fedor on the ground, he does a lot of that stuff too with the transitional ground and pound. He's really good at, he'll use rides and knee on belly to let guys move underneath them and then use their movements to hit. One interesting and kind of unique thing with his top game that I like is that he'll posture up from guard, and then when guys try to like sit up for a takedown or turn into him, he'll go to that little arm in guillotine position, that little like Pat Curran or Jack Hermanson guillotine.
Yeah.
He finished the guillotine against a Brazilian guy, but in some other fights, he's hung out there and like not tried to finish it, but actually underhooked on the far arm just to like keep the guy's head trapped beneath his armpit. And then as they stand up, he'll knee him in the face and then like mat return him.
Oh, nice. I still haven't heard a good name for that choke aside from what I've heard it referred to through my old coaches, which is the boa choke. And I like that one. It's not like a snake boa. It's like more like a burlesque dancer, the feathered boa. Because that's what what their arm looks like.
Head and arm guillotine or something.
Yeah, because head and arm guillotine's already a thing, that's confusing, right?
Yeah.
And guillotine and head and arm guillotine, people sadly confuse enough, so it's like, I don't want to add to that confusion, so I don't know. I'm not popular enough. We need like a Jack Slack to like take hold of the boa choke or something. But that's a great show. Man, I'm looking here because like I only watched, I didn't realize how long ago, 8 years ago, man. Because he first came on back when I was following ACB. So back around ACB 49, I remember getting ready to go somewhere and being late because I just really I don't know if it ended up being any kind of fight of the year kind of a deal in 2016, but like Shabley and Vartanian at 49 was the first time he came on my radar. And both those guys obviously were really impressive, and that was an entertaining fight by my memory. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. And then but I only watched like that short stretch between that and like him fighting like AAA, and then between the UFC just picking up even more and stuff. I haven't really been able to follow what is now called ACA. But even back then, I was really impressed. That clinch stuff, actually, that's what I actually remember a lot of that in those fights in that stretch of his career.
Yeah. He got a little bit inactive after the AAA fight and then one or two other fights. Mm-hmm. There was some confusion over whether he was going to like stay in ACA or maybe looking at signing with the UFC. He ended up fighting a couple of Brazilians in some other promotion, and he kind of looked like he might be a little bit past it. But recently, he went back to ACA. He smashed Yusuf Raisov, who I think you're familiar with
Yep.
Rysov.
Yeah,
Very good fighter.
yeah, he used to be a featherweight. He grew out of that, I'm guessing, because he was a featherweight back when I covered him.
Yeah, I remember complaining a lot when he moved up to lightweight. I thought he should have stuck with featherweight, but at this point he's kind of grown into the weight class and like
Nice.
probably couldn't make featherweight anymore.
Right. Yeah, he was
And
decent
then
size, sure.
yeah, and then his most recent fight, he won the finals of the ACA lightweight Grand Prix against Artem Reznikov, and just smashed the absolute shit out of him. It was one of the worst beatdowns of the year. Reznikov is a like really muscly steroidy wrestler who like looks to throw guys down and get on top and look for submissions. Vartanian sliced him up in the feet with front kicks. Whenever Reznikov took him down, he would like base out, quad pot up, and like wrestle back up to his feet. And once he'd pierced his gas tank with the front kicks, he just went crazy on him with head kicks, knees, transitional offense, just whooped his ass all over the cage. And it was like, it should have been stopped a round before it was. Seriously brutal. So he's been on a pretty good run lately.
Random. I just closed the tab, and I saw, shout out to Kyle McLaughlin, Aliens 4K just came up on my screen. Alien 4K, I should say. Let me know if you guys know where to find that movie. Shout out to Kyle, by the way. That was a great pick, though. That's a great pick. I love it. I'm glad you came strong with the hipster pick, sir. And if you're looking for, some random Russians to follow or some random fights to go back and watch, I think we gave you just a couple there. Some good
Once
names.
the show goes up, I'll post some clips of Vartanian's transitional offense on my Twitter account. So if you want to get a sense of what he can do, look up Ryan A. Wag MMA on Twitter.
Perfect. And when I post this actual show, I will grab that and make like a little impromptu thread. I'll put that on there. I'll put my Eve Edwards highlight, and it'll all be connected to the episode, so people can get the best of both worlds there as well. We'll share that out. That was a great shout. All right, let's go to number one. So, do we have crossover on our number one here? I got to imagine.
I'm sure we do.
We do. And even though, as a lot of my favorites, I find out they just always, end up being worse when they're done or almost done fighting. They just make you like DC, like my DC or my the risk of burning a name here, Dom Cruz love, they just tend to make it worse. Like, wait, I have to remind myself that I was really big fans of their games. They were
At
fighting.
least Cruz isn't a YouTuber.
Yeah. There's that, but like, but yeah, this guy, I feel like he's been in the headlines. Maybe he's heading a certain way, talking trash about my guy who like almost made this list. We'll talk about him in honorable mentions. And a flyweight, one of my favorite flyweights, who made this list, but it's not that flyweight. It's a different flyweight. It's Demetrius Johnson, baby, number one. Is that your number one too?
Who else?
I mean, who else, right? I mean, the mighty whiz bar, which just sounds like a kind of a thing you do not want to type in your search bar, Google. But yeah, like the flying, the rock bottom
Mousetrap
to an
was
arm
right
bar.
there.
Huh?
Mousetrap was right there.
Yeah, Mousetrap was right there. Instead, we gotta, trigger my perverted thoughts. Like we all need that in the world. But yeah, this is Demetrius Johnson, of course. I obviously threw the big highlight right off the top right there. If you wanted to like just have a single card to throw on the table for your justification, your pick, maybe you throw down that move. But there is just so much with DJ. I'll just list two of my favorites real quick. A random, a more recent one from the one of the few one championship fights I've seen, to one of his older title defenses. But like, I don't want to give him credit for adjusting because that's not the topic that we're talking about. But they did feed into one another, right? His ability to adjust obviously fed into his transition game / strengths of his transition game, right? They had a very symbiotic relationship. And one of my favorites is the first John Dotson fight where he gets, knocked on his butt within the first 2 rounds. I think mainly in round 2 is most of that damage, I believe, is sustained. But then he, again, we're not giving points on this list for adjusting, but he does adjust. And some of my favorite transitions, And he does it, I believe, in the 191 fight as well with Dotson. You see him get a little more creative, but he'll go from like, single legs, failed takedowns, push you against the clinch, and then he'll use that tie up to set up a strike. Like he'll have a single leg, but then he'll grab your wrist and loop that
It's
wrist
like the
really
cross
quickly.
grip underneath the leg.
Yeah, under
Just
the leg,
insane.
and then come up with an elbow, like just little sneaky that like like it took forever for everybody to mimic John Jones overhook wrist feed, that more basic setup, right? He's doing that kind of. It's very similar theme when you think about it, right? You see Usman did it to Masvidal and John Jones tweets in the live show. You've seen a lot more people do that version, but like DJ's doing it with a leg and then coming up with like an elbow. And I mean, if that's not transitioning, melding like, three different threats of phases, right? Like what's going on? Is it a takedown? Is it a strike? I'm trying to maintain my balance, even though I'm against the cage. It's a really weird plethora of threats that he would keep you kind of on game with. And even though, his striking left a lot to be desired, if you go back and do like retrospective watches, you're like, oh, well, it's, mainly the grappling. Maybe the striking is a lot of flat. Maybe there's a lot of pomp and circumstance if you want to go back to watch earlier stuff. Maybe it's not the stance shifting is not as effective. But, then you go to the, Adrian Moraes fight. Like, say what you will about Moraes, just forget who he's facing. I love this setup, especially as a southpaw, and Demetrius works from both stances. But it's such a great entry because a lot of times, like, when you do takedown drills and stuff like that, or any kind of drills, whether it's takedown drills or striking drills, you're drilling as orthodox fighters. You're getting the lesson as how to do it from orthodox against orthodox, right? It's one of the southpaw dilemmas where you have to reverse engineer everything you're constantly doing because you're backwards. You have to find a different way to do it, or yada yada. And even though you should find the answers from no matter what your stance or the fighter stance, because there are always answers. I like how he kind of gets there, and it's something that I use where it's like I already love the front teep, right, and whatnot, and we see like Thai marching variations to varying effects, like Charles Oliveira, just to throw so people can get this if they're not sure what I'm talking about. That knee lifting where you're lifting the knee but also coming forward, and that can be a defense for checks, but it can also be, set up kicks. It's like you're parlaying both. It's a transitionary move in itself, right? And from southpaw against Moraes, I think this is the rematch. I believe I'm going to out myself here again for not really watching one. But this is Mighty Mouse's revenge fight, right? Not the first one, obviously. He lost.
Yeah, their second fight.
But he goes from a southpaw stance and he lifts the knee to kind of get that reaction and uses that without throwing a kick necessarily, to step through, and now he's in an orthodox stance, and because of that momentum of the step through, he can duck a counter. I'm not sure if a counter hook comes, but if my memory serves, I think he kind of level changes, like, which is good. He always level changing for the counter hook, something like I try to hardwire myself to. And then he comes over, I believe, over the top with a right. But the point is, it's like you can do a bunch of things. You can come over the top with a right from there. Now you're in the orthodox stance, or you can, you feinted with the front kick to get them to draw their guard up, and then now you can step down into a powerful level change if you're more comfortable shooting from orthodox, And I remember just seeing that alone, like just the layers of that basic step. I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Like you're not even like a southpaw, and you kind of just hacked the code right there, right? Like, like, as much as I love Charles Oliveira, he, as we see with the Poirier check right hook, even though he goes on to win that fight, or the check right hook he eats from Islam leads to his demise, right? Like, Charles has always been who almost made this list as well in his own ways, by the way. He's a great transitional fighter, in my opinion. But he is just as at risk when he's doing that, right? Whereas, like, just, I don't know, just something about like DJ, like you just see it like, oh, I hate the whole video game analogy and stuff, but the guy really just kind of pieces it together like a video game player. He's really taking it piece by piece, and again, maybe don't listen to him talk so much, but just judging by his game, has this seemingly crazy understanding for the game that he's applying in real time.
He's just doing another fucking sport out there. It just doesn't look like anything anybody he's fighting knows how to do.
Yeah, and you
Uh,
see great fighters with and I'm referencing great fighters with similar ideas, and they just can't execute it nowhere near as cleanly or as functionally as he can.
they don't have nobody has the layers that DJ does. Uh, like in the Dodson fight, Dodson was able to keep up with him initially, and then DJ would keep going and add something else onto it. He'd anticipate the next transition and be ready with his counter, and then Dodson just gets drowned, and eventually nobody has any response. Uh, if you watch like Golden Age Muay Thai fights, you'll never see more responsive or more like layered transitions than there. And like part of that is that they don't. It's a kind of like a hybrid grappling and striking sport where they don't have the static control positions that MMA does, where you can pin guys against the cage with an underhook, and it's all focused on like, doing something in the clinch without taking the guy down. You want to be sweeping them out. You want to be kneeing them or elbowing them.
Mm.
So it's constant action and constant transitions, and guys are if you stall for a moment, you try to stall in a position, the guy will find an escape, and then you're immediately like a step behind. So you have to be ready to anticipate all of that. And TJ is the only fighter I've ever seen who seems to have an inherent understanding of those kind of deep layered transitions on that level.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you go back to his basic fights and back to how the adjusting feeds the transitions. Like his striking isn't at the level it is at the Mirage fight, but even on like a basic forensics level, you see Matt Hume able to kind of break it down for him where like you're getting hit more in this stance, go to the other stance, and he can actually, unlike a lot of MMA fighters even today, he could actually legitly kind of fight from both stance, not as competently later in his career, but being able to do that. And I don't know why this popped up when you were talking, but since now we don't have to worry about really like burning other names, but while still staying on DJ and giving him his due here. Um, you also have to obviously rate him higher, not just for the weight classes he fought in, but like a lot of guys you could talk about being on, this list. He's fought those guys, or he's fought fighters that you could rate quite high. Maybe not as transition fighters per se, but as far as who he's transitioning against, the talent. Whether it's fights he won, like Cejudo, or fights he lost, which I know he technically also has a loss to Cejudo, technically. But like fighters he lost to that could also be on this list, in my opinion, like Dominic Cruz, right? And he almost fought for a time TJ Dillashaw, which I'm curious, Ryan, what do you think? What do you think that fight would have looked like? Not to put you on the spot, but at the time
At
where,
the time, I thought DJ was going to whoop him. I didn't think DJ would be able to get his grappling going, and I didn't think the striking was too close.
Mhm.
But after seeing how TJ looked at flyweight, who knows?
yeah, I
The
completely
speed
agree.
could have been a major issue, and if he was kind of compromised, we didn't get a chance to like see that play out for a long time. But if DJ is could like surprise him with some really quick offense, there's a chance he could do to him kind of like something what he did to Benavidez in the second round
Yes,
in their
yeah,
second fight.
yeah, that's a great. I was just
Benavidez,
thinking of that.
another
Yeah,
elite transitional fighter
yeah,
that DJ
perfect.
not only kept up with in transitions but outfought.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's obviously a great barometer for these kind of lists. And I know something you definitely live by with your work. You never, no matter what the goal or focus is of what you're working on, Ryan, I know that's something you always keep a real good consistency. You are always contextualizing, as far as, uh, how high, whether or not we should rate these things, if that makes sense. And I appreciate
Yeah,
that. Because I think people don't realize that, they lose the forest of the trees. They see the name, they see the highlight reel, they don't understand the division or what you're grading. Whether it's uh, I dare say a pound for pound topic when you're actually having to really incorporate, like lighter weight classes into the picture.
yeah,
Um, and that's not to say you can't talk about heavier guys either, right? Shout out to Usyk, obviously, but
absolutely.
right, but so that's not a hard and fast rule either. But yeah, it's really a real backing up point, I think, for these selections as far as what we're talking about, as far as MMA goes, I should say, because the vast between the even though you could still say heavyweight's a different sport in boxing than it is other you could still kind of make those claims if you wanted to, right? Or arguments. I don't think that this vast of a difference as MMA, in my opinion, as far as skill levels.
Boxing and wrestling, they have competent heavyweights. They have heavyweights who look like they're doing the same sport as the rest of their athletes.
Yes. Yeah, it's not just us like being unmercilessly on heavyweight MMA folks. Like there's actually points of comparison here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to like what you were saying about the way he used that single leg on the cage to beat up Dodson.
Yeah.
It's even more incredible when you like look at the context of their first fight. So DJ put on like one of the best transitional performances of all time in the first Dodson fight.
Yes.
He took a lot of damage early. He got dropped once or twice. And then in the rounds 3 to 5, he figured out that Dodson couldn't keep up with him in the clinch. So he just stuck to him like glue the entire time. Oh yeah, man, that was brutal.
Fucked him up. Oh.
Beat the absolute shit out of him in the clinch. And he never like stuck on one tactic for too long. He was constantly changing grips. Anytime Dodson tried to lock down the position, he'd like slide in a frame and pivot out or turn him just to find enough space to start whooping his ass again. And then in the second fight, Dodson knew that DJ could do that, and he really wanted it to not happen. So he was like running away from the clinch, or he'd try and like stall and then push away as quickly as he could. And DJ wasn't able to get off as much of that transitional offense, because Dodson just wanted nothing to do with the clinch. But then he figured out that like, okay, I can try to do a takedown and he'll defend the takedown. And this is basically a clinch, right? And he found that like little sub position of a sub position that he could use to like work the same kind of stuff that he was doing in their first fight.
It was like
insane.
It was like a less risky big nog meta as far as like shooting a shit shot and not even caring if you get it. You just need the contact to get your game going.
Absolutely.
Except he didn't have to sit back to a half guard to do it. He could just do it standing in the clinch and like
didn't have to put himself underneath Fedor.
Yeah, which Damian Maia took from him later in that lineage and whatnot. So I love that move, by the way. But again, and that counts for like if we're just talking about like a cool, like if we wanted to like, vivisection almost like a, just take and then take a section out and just of a particular game, not good enough to make this list. But as far as like transitional tactic, if that makes sense, like, oh, that's a great tactic in my book. But yeah, it still doesn't hold a candle to the economy and efficiency of what a guy like DJ was out there doing and making hay with, and kind of like akin to the Fedor example of like like even just taking not just the clinch, right, which is Fedor's thing, that the hip bump more specifically in the clinch, but like let's just take the front head, let's take the more rudimentary clinch version of DJ, right? The first Dodson fight. And even just, focus on that front headlock part. Like similar to Fedor with the hip bump, like this guy was giving us gave us the blueprint. The answer has already been out there. It's like, why, in this age of, people were playing the game with the rules back then. And with the new rule change, people are still playing the game. It's still a problem. Is it a down to punt, right? Like, DJ was giving you that answer. It's like, how about you just take control in your own hands and land some free knees in the process here? And no one gets creative with the front headlock. And what makes it extra annoying is because like one of the only guys I can remember in recent memory getting real creative from the front headlock is Patty frickin' Pimblett. Which just pisses me off. It's like, come on, you're going to really let this guy fucking pick up the pen on this book? Like DJ's giving you guys the blueprint here on what you can do to people.
Man, the way he was feeding Dodson knees, and then like he would, as soon as Dodson popped up, he'd like go to uppercuts or huge hooks to the body and like just smush his face against the cage and elbow him. I can't possibly overstate how incredible his awareness and just ability to never stop having another option is in the clinch. In terms of what he was doing technically there that I really liked, one of my favorite things about DJ, something that I don't think any MMA fighter aside from him is particularly good at, he's great at exploiting his opponent's exits from the clinch to get back onto them. This is something that you see a lot in Muay Thai, but very little in MMA. When somebody's breaking the clinch, there will be a moment where their feet aren't in position to strike back or defend a punch. You'll see a lot of guys break with like a left hook, but they're not ready for like any kind of layered exchange. Their feet aren't set to smoothly pivot away or be immediately ready to counter when you hop back onto them. And as DJ would be drowning his opponent in the clinch and they'd be desperate to get out, so they'd like push his face away or like run away from him. And as soon as they did that, he'd hop back on them and throw like 3 punches at them. And then what are you going to do when DJ's swarming at you and you're not ready for it? You're going to throw back a massive hook or like just something blindly to try and back him off. And he'd always see that, duck under it, and now he's back in the clinch.
Yeah, I love that. No, that's a great point. That's something I notice doing a lot of Muay Thai pad work lately, and a lot of the combos I'm noticing has a lot of emphasis on their exits, and if they're not pushing you away, then you can, you push them in a favorable direction right into a kick, and there's always second parts ingrained into it, which I really appreciate. And yeah, that's a great example of DJ with applying that ethos. And again, back to my common thread with a lot of these transition fighters, a lot of the ones that stood out to me were wicked off the brakes, man. That just seems to be a common thread, right?
DJ's always ready to break too. He in his positional clinch game, he kind of prioritizes the ability to create movement. He doesn't really look to lock down the position with double underhooks or over unders. In fact, when he's in an over under position where both guys have one underhook, usually you'll overhook on their underhook. Like wrap your arm around them from over top so that they can't go behind you, so that you can like pressure into the whizzer. But DJ, he usually doesn't take the overhook. Instead, he keeps his hand like on their shoulder, and that lets him just quickly like turn them in the clinch and find space to swim to another position. Or something he really likes to do with it is just really quickly like move it to their head and snap them down into a knee. He was doing this to Dodson all the time in their first fight, where Dodson would be like clamped on the overhook and DJ would just have his hand resting on the shoulder. And then as soon as a little bit of space opens up, he just smacks Dodson's head down right into a knee, and Dodson never saw it coming.
What I love about that too, especially for people that aren't familiar with Dodson, and I know he got temperamental in a lot of his fights, but although a lot of that was due to his weird magnet for fouls. But DJ wasn't fouling him to get these responses. Like, this is the first time, if you've been following Dodson, he was kind of just like this unshakable, weird, like, I'm not taking this seriously, but I can just come in and backflip on everybody. I'm the best athlete in the room kind of a dude. And you just see him get broken down, like, physically, emotionally, in those fights, right? I mean, it really did a number to Dodson.
That moment in their second fight where Dodson kicks him in the balls and Herb Dean's like, you want time? And DJ's like, no, fuck off.
Yes.
You get out of my way.
Yeah. That was like the Powhatan Hill minus the knockout, right? All right, that was a great one for DJ. Let's before we get too much here, let's get honorable mentions. I'm just going off my mentions. I'm hoping it includes stuff, but if you did any kind of quote tweet that I'm not attached to, so maybe I didn't see the reply, feel free to cue those up, Ryan. Otherwise, I'm going to read off some lists and you can kind of crack wise on it. Cool?
Sounds good.
All right, I think our first person who responded, I only posted these around this time. I didn't get around to Instagram, so it's only Twitter. Diamond Elbows, at Diamond Elbows, who I see on Twitter a lot.
No, cut the feed.
Oh, cut the feed.
Don't read his out.
Don't read it out?
No, I'm kidding.
Okay, all right. I thought he seems like a friendly person with the community here. He goes, my favorite transitional fighters probably go DJ, Edgar, St. Pierre, Kamaru Usman for his clinch game. Then he goes, John Jones for actually kind of doing it at 205. And he adds, this isn't ranking them and how I like them. It's based on how much I like their transition games. Fair?
Jones and Usman are great ones too. Jones really pioneered a lot of the wrist control stuff we were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Say what you will about Jones, is the fact that he could transition was part of the reason what made him stick out so much, right? And yeah, I'm a big fan of wrist control. Being able to do that, he kind of reminds me almost like it's a weird comparison, but kind of like what I said before as far as the Frank Shamrock, where it's like athleticism and creativity, and maybe not as good of an athlete as some may argue, but he definitely has a lot of those things there that allowed him to kind of parlay things into another improv. Parlaying and improv, that's part of transitioning too, right? These are skills that are kind of attached to it.
He had a unique build and he used it very well.
Yeah, yeah, it really fed well to transition. I mean, the what was the Bader single leg defense to the hop over to his
The magic
back?
stick.
Yeah, magic sticking. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I mean, just being able to pull off stuff like that at higher weight classes and heavyweight and heavier weight MMA is is a lower bar, but he was clearing it with ease and
Yeah,
by a mile.
absolutely.
So yeah, you can't deny him there. Um, Christopher Aguiar MMA. Fuck yeah, top five shows are legitimately one of my favorite things in this space. Thank you, I appreciate that. Hopefully we do these things justice. I know it's a deep dive, more audio. I'm more of an audio person, anyways. I just do YouTube to make the kids happy, Ryan. But I'm more like you, man. I like the audio better. Um, a shout out to my guy Movement Marshalls at MVMNT Marshalls. I feel like I was about to read a watch advertisement there. Movement watches. Now he goes, Bendo is my sneaky pick for slick transitional game in the earlier days. I like that one.
Oh yeah. Bendo was really good at like defensively in transitions, weirdly. Like the Edgar
Yes.
fight, Edgar was trying to transition all over him and he had a really hard time hitting him because Henderson was always ready to like slip the punch no matter how furious the grappling exchange got. And you remember in the like I think the fifth round of the Michael Chandler fight where Chandler like was trying to get a high crotch on the
Yeah.
cage
Yeah.
and Bendo sat the corner and just like beat his ass from crackdown for like
Yes.
3 minutes.
That was hard too. He think punted him on his head with it. And yeah, and that kind of harkens back to some of the examples I gave with Eve Edwards, right? Where defense counts as transitions depending on how you're using it, right? And Henderson fit that bill. I like that he got mentioned because he really was just really slick in the clinch. He's done some creative stuff that I really haven't seen people do since. Even if it's some wacky, some of it flamboyant stuff, but like, the scorpion kick or up elbow things. But then he had more practical versions of that where he would pin you against the cage with the single leg threat, but then he would like, wouldn't he do like it wasn't doing like Marco Huas foot stomps, but he was doing like full like Taekwondo style front kicks to your other leg, your
Yeah,
other
like
posting
toe
leg.
kicks to the calf or on Pettis where he like did those weird heel kicks,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The heel kicks. Yep. And,
punching Nate Diaz in the knee.
and again, like he
He
was
did
a
he like
decision.
faked the knee punch and dropped him with a
Oh,
punch upstairs too.
oh, that was a
It's
good
like
one. That was an
the
aggressive Benson
weirdest,
Henderson,
craziest
by the
shit.
way. Go back and watch that Nate Diaz fight, folks. I know we all think about the middle finger highlight, right, on Fox. But that was actually a really aggressive Benson Henderson. People forget like that. Like if you have criticisms of Benson Henderson's game, go watch that fight. I think you'd be happy.
He beat the shit out of Nate.
It was bad. Like he had like he owed him money. Like you were feeling bad for Nate at the end. Like holy crap, is he gonna stop him? Like it was like you forget how bad he was. It was kind of like a Koscheck GSP, where everybody remembers GSP, jabbing him, and GSP was racking up another decision at that point. Like, no, he beat the shit out of Koscheck toward the end there. It was
I
bad.
don't remember Koscheck's face after the fight.
Yeah, it was like, it wasn't like some, hello, I'm going to jab you, okay, we're done. Like, no, it was, he fucked him up. And since I know it's not, I'm just going to jump ahead, just because I know it's not mentioned on anybody else's list, but George Masvidal is a fighter that always pops in my head on this
Yeah.
list, just because, again, off the break, striking off the break, he's one of the best at that, right? As far as that goes, flowing. But striking off the break off of like a defensive flow, back to the Ben Henderson or Eve Edwards. And to show how underrated they are, just go save yourself the time. Just watch Ben Henderson versus Jorge Masvidal in Korea. And it's just a great 5-round fight where they both get to show like all the underrated parts of their games. From like body kicks, clinch transitions, scrambles, front headlock chokes to reversals. And then they'll like one guy will front headlock choke, the other guy will defend, and then the next time they get in the position, they'll add on another layer, and then like Benson will try to like extend it to a third layer by bridging back over to try to give the guillotine more light, even though he ends up having to like I think just like kind of spin out and they just go back to their feet. Like they just keep like back and forthing each other. You know what I'm talking about, Ryan?
That whole fight was like, when you're watching like professional wrestling and they do those like really flowy chain wrestling
Yes,
sequences
yeah.
at the start,
Yeah.
where it looks like they're like barely resisting and they're very cooperative,
Yes.
but it's constant flowing and it never stops. That was that fight. Like you could score every round 10-10 and I wouldn't complain.
Yeah, it was like you had like Arn Anderson and like or Fit Finley, like those old like out of shape like old school wrestling guys with the bellies, but they but they had like the finesse wrestling down. They would go from like wrist lock to hammer lock to snap down. It's a snapmare takeover, and they just like roll. There's always like those early flows in the match just to get the wrestlers warmed up. Like they do the old school techniques, the hammer lock back and forth with. Like you're right, it was like the equivalent to that, except these guys were in good shape. But yes, they were still in like a quiet veteran portion of their career still. Rios was in Truesdale. We just shouted him earlier in the podcast. Is one of my terrorizers I've armed and deputized. No, shouts to Rio. You're the man. He goes, honorable mention Zhang Wei Li. He goes, I made a highlight of her transition game that most WMMA YouTubers don't talk about or even mention because they are trash at looking at fights. Again, look at him throwing the shade out there. But I had to share his highlight because it's really good analysis. Okay, this one you're tagged to, Ryan. I've been talking too much. This is the perfect one to hand off because I think this is another, and I don't mean this ironically. I think this is a legit another cool kid. We got our guy here who does great stuff. He shares great analysis video stuff. Alexander Volcara France, of course, at Volcara. What's his full name? At Volcara France. If you want to follow him on Twitter, Ryan, you know which one I'm talking about, right? Can you set this up for the folks?
Oh yeah. The meme where
it's a good one.
He has like the two small brains arguing over GSP and DJ.
Yes.
And like the big brain sitting off in the corner thinking about Edward Vartanian.
Yes. So perfect. I had to throw that one over to. He looks really good in that photo. I was like, wow, I snazzed up in the three piece. Well. Yeah, that distracted me, It was like really cleans up well there. Obviously shout out to Vocal France, a good follow on the artist formerly known as Twitter. Martin P was replying to me for something different, but shout out to Martin P anyways, long-time listener. Christopher, again, who mentioned earlier, who loves the top 5 shows, he contributed at Aguiar MMA. Apologize if I brutalized that. Christopher, he has GSP, Couture, Frankie, Usman, Benson. Ballsy putting a heavyweight on there, and I'm definitely not going to, besmirch the name of one of my favorites in the gym I train at. But yeah, okay, Randy Couture.
Couture's one of the heavyweights that deserves to be mentioned there.
Yeah, he does. Go watch, again, similar to Bustamante, really underrated boxing. Not just underrated boxing because everyone's like, oh, Couture wrestling, but he actually had an amateur boxing more in the military. But still in amateur boxing, like Bustamante. But he was actually able to blend it in his game. And since Couture was a clinch guy, he just did that better than, obviously, Lin, even better than Henderson, even though he wasn't as emphatic of a puncher. And, go watch transitions. Just go watch his Gabe Gonzaga fight. I'll keep it simple. Go watch his fight against Gabe, which is a great fight. It's the oldest title defense in UFC history, by the way. And even people that were backing Couture were afraid from him because this is Gonzaga just coming off of Crocop, folks, right? And he goes and he schools him. Like the way he's like moving around him, even the boxing, like he blocks the kick and counters into the box, like closing from kicking to boxing range, He a different way, but you can almost see why people loved both Fedor and Couture and wanted to see their games collide, regardless of the age difference. Absolutely. Because they just
kind of
heavyweight clinch fighters, man. It's a cheat code. We talk about heavyweight grappling, but really, a lot of the greats were clinch artists, And I think that goes through a lot of sports. I mean, you look at Overeem, not just in MMA, but kickboxing, right? He was a guy who really embraced and decided to excel in the clinch. And if you want to do that in heavyweight combat sports, it excels for you. And particularly because, the reason why wrist fighting is hand control is kind of the unsung hero. Because if you're a good clinch fighter, chances are, and you know this, Ryan, you're a good ground and pounder, which exists in the sport of MMA. Yep. So it's almost an extra incentive and reason why the greats, often were not so coincidentally good in the clinch as far as the higher weight classes of MMA.
For sure.
John Jones. We were just talking about him.
Yep.
He's long, but really it was his clinch game that's been, from early Bonner to even latter career. That's been his safety spot.
The way he would use like double wrist control to pin guys on the cage and like just keep them there for a while, let them make an overreaction so he can duck in on the hips, and if they didn't, then he could just elbow their face off.
Yeah.
His lovely spinning elbows that came off the wrist control.
Absolutely, yep. But yeah, Christopher, people might do a double take at your couture list, but I think you pitched the right kind of guys to put that on your list. So I think we hopefully did a good job of justifying your pick there. Of course, our guy, one of my favorite analysts and yours, at Fenyo X Sky. Give him a follow. No particular order. He has GSP. Leon. Oh, by the way, I should have done. I totally missed my opportunity to do my Edwards swerve. Make you think I was going with Leon and going Jocelyn, but not Jocelyn. It was Eves the whole time. The Edwards trap. There's a couple of Edwards. There's a few Edwards we could have had for this list. Again, shout out to Jocelyn Edwards and her crescent kick double leg. Your Mark Weir shot. And shout out to your Mark Weir reference. That was a deep pull. That was a good one, man. But yeah, Fenyo has Leon Edwards, of course, DJ, Joe B, a great shout that we said is more than justified. TJ Dillashaw, another great shout. He was really close. That's a weird love triangle. You mean he especially because he lists them in order: DJ, Joe B, TJ, and Cruz. Right? There's a lot of love triangle there, right? And Dominic Cruz was probably, I would say,
those people beat Cruz.
Yeah, and Cruz. Also, yeah. Especially depending how you score the TJ one, right?
Took you
but but the fact that Cruz kind of has, he's got technically his victories over all three of them. Again, we tend to forget. We think of Cruz as just the guy who has passive aggressive, vindictive commentary for Keith Peterson, but he actually fought folks. For you younger fans out there, he did more than that. He did more than argue with Keith Peterson through his broadcast calls. He was actually, again, another guy who parlayed defense with offense, right? Cruz would fit that bill of transition fighters, right, Ryan?
Absolutely. The way he set up his takedowns was almost totally unique. Nobody is doing that like him. The way he would throw like a darting right hand where he brings his rear foot up and then glides to the side with it. And as soon as you follow him, you're like head upside of your ass,
yes,
ass over tea kettle.
He essentially you used to have to be like a Sean Shirk and be like full of steroids and just like driving and like have a all-American background, right? And like drive guys with like a crazy double to get that effect where their legs go fly. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And ironically, GSP did it to Shirk because Shirk was so super tiny at welterweight, right? So it was funny to see the guy who was doing that to everybody have it done to him by GSP. But these were more traditional double leg. Cruz was getting this effect with like how Ryan set it up. Like it was a finesse move, a lighter guy. And he would almost make these guys like side flip, right?
Like you barely had to work for it. You would just like walk yourself upside down.
Yeah, for someone who's a wrestling novice like myself, I was like, is that the knee tap? Is that the Barza guard? What is he? Is he? He would just get off to that angle so fast. You really had to, really rewind and put it together. When you're, I was first at least trying to look at his game, and he was one of the only things I could actually. He was one of the only fighters where I could actually use a. It's kind of silly because it's just shifting or whatever, but it actually made me kind of understand this saying to it, where it was like, it wasn't like just the typical like orthodox fighter like Jacare Souza even could do, where even though Jacare was an athlete, so I'm not trying to diss him, but like as far as the Jacare orthodox fighter, I'm going to step back and I'm going to shift to a southpaw check right hook, right? Like that's a pretty basic, advanced but also basic, right? In a sense, MMA wise. But the way Cruz would do it was different. He would almost use like this old like kind of like karate footwork we'd call it, called opening the gate. And I didn't know why. I was like, maybe it was opening the gate because it was like a wide swinging stance where you're, Cruz would be like almost from his orthodox slash not really traditional orthodox stance because his footwork was of course a little more narrow, right, and a little more.
He'd go into like a really narrow stance where his feet were almost together, and then he'd use it to like split step into a wider stance where he could bounce to the side.
Yeah, and he was almost ended up in like your like side like horse stance though, because he would swing it way out like a gate. But then part of me wonders, I'm like, maybe they called it opening the gate because of how Cruz used it. You're inviting somebody in. So you would invite someone in. You would not just use it to avoid offense, but you would invite them to overextend and throw themselves out of position for offense, right? That's what kind of that move is for. And then with MMA, it opens again, not just strikes, but takedowns as well. Of course, he always attached a really beautiful, not a beautiful, but like a really effective, I should say, right hook. That was one of his main scoring things against guys like Dillashaw. like he kind of had to use those moves more so. And then Dillashaw started corralling more with kicks and so forth. But yeah, like again, transitioning defense to offense, and offense using offense as his defense for the takedowns when he would mix those in. And he was always really underrated there. Like he, you know, say what you will about Lloyd Irvin, and there's a lot to say. Go look it up, folks. But as far as like a basic level, like training guys for basics and stuff, like functional MMA jiu-jitsu, I would dare say he's done a decent job. If you look at like kind of, it's been underrated aspects of fighters who you wouldn't suspect that to be their strength, and win or lose, they're usually not really getting tooled in that aspect, right? Like
Yeah.
Sadiq is like body work, freak knockout, right? Dominic Cruz, like outside of like early Cruz shooting into a Faber guillotine, right? He's not really getting owned in the grappling department, right? Or anything like that. And then of course he trained under Bias here. He trained a lot under Neil Melanson, my catch wrestling coach. So when when he's not giving passive aggressive stuff on the broadcast, like when you listen to him talk about like he actually knows what he's talking about. Like,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I feel like he's a way better grappler / submission grappler than any of us would think. But you just wouldn't. He was so good at dictating that part. You really would never have to see it on anyone's terms but him, his own.
Whenever somebody like threatened him with any kind of grappling thing, like a takedown or like a submission, you got to see a little bit of it. It didn't happen too often, but in the final Faber fight, their first couple rounds, there's a lot of crazy scrambles there, where they're both like lifting each other up and like countering with funk rolls, a bunch of crazy stuff. A couple times in the Dillashaw fight too, where like there was no way to pin Cruz down, or like you can't get that guy into like half guard and like get a crossface on him. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and also back to the flowing nature of being able to flow, as far as being a transition person. That was also Cruz too, not just because of just the general flowing nature, but like I would dare say when he wanted to, he would have underrated kicks, but it was because that, and again, not that his technique was ever like, picturesque or something that's like common coached, right? But like it was usually after he would throw like even crappier versions of his hands because he just wanted to throw so he'd be kind of going left to right,
spamming like 3 to 4 punch combos and then punting as you run away.
Yeah, and it wasn't, and regardless, the punches nor the kicks were anything to write home about. But the reason why he would actually punctuate kind of decently as far as power with his kicks is because, again, this fits into why it makes a good transition fighter, being able to flow, whether it's flowing with the weight of your body and knowing what counterbalances what. And he understood that. So you even see in his warm-ups where he'd just be doing these weird robotic warm-ups. But it was just because it's not so much he's not worried about the technique. He understands just what move's going to flow into the next. If I put my weight over here, that's going to set this up, and this is what I really want. So I just want to get your attention up here, and then I'm gonna come hard, down low with a kick here or something like that. And I don't know. I just see those little attributes, and I'm like, oh yeah, this makes sense. These are back to the foundations of what makes someone a transition fighter, is that they can flow.
Cruz, the flow that you're talking about and the fluency in transitions was really like the glue that held Cruz's style together.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things you could do on the feet that he didn't really have a great striking response to, but he could always just drop onto your hips from any position and take you down. And that got him through a lot of otherwise tough striking matchups that, well, people might be able to solve him there. There was nobody that could keep up with him in transitions.
And then you incorporate the fact that he was one of the first guys actually feinting out there. And then, and you add that and it's like, oh yeah, now he has a beat to adjust to with these transitions. And that allowed him to stay ahead throughout his prime. He also had last 4 on Fenyo's list is RDA, Jan, Whitaker, and Volk. I'm a big fan of all those guys, but for this list, I say that those last 3 are ones I feel like I would have maybe seen on more lists, Jan, Whitaker, and Volk.
Volkanovski almost made mine, but I just couldn't really find anyone to cut for him.
Yeah, and one of the things with Volk that kind of took some points off, because he almost made mine too, and he's more than justifiable, and back to that DJ and Moraes setup that I was talking about, is that, a lot of fighters that we see, and I especially with my Southpaw reports, right, and you guys can see and pontificate off that as well, off of points you guys also make yourself, which is that a lot of fighters forget about their jabs in MMA, right? Even the best jabbers, when they meet a southpaw, like we're like, oh crap, right? And with Volk, we saw that kind of get taxed a lot as far as he was relying on the classic, whether it's fighters he's beaten like Max Holloway who are good, or fighters who are definitely not known for their striking like Ronnie Haniyaya, right? It's that classic, but back to what I said, like that lifting knee, Charles Oliveira and even DJ starts that combo with Moraes with, right? And then they usually do that like with their right, because it's the opposite in this stance. They're usually the orthodox facing the southpaw, so they're lifting with their power side, their right, and whether or not they're spamming a power kick like most people will from the open stance, because that's all you hear commentary. You got it. Oh, they're wide open for the power side kick. Yeah. And they'll either throw that or fake throw that and step down with a right hook, and then not even still be comfortable enough to throw the southpaw left, which is really good. Like Darren Till got knocked out with Jorge Masvidal, right? Who we mentioned on this transitionary fighters, right? There's another nice transition there for Jorge. But even a guy as good as Volk wasn't really. They end up just doing this reaching right hook thing, right? And sometimes it's great and you get a knockout from it, like Justin Gaethje versus Edson Barbosa. I know Edson wasn't a southpaw. It was just the way the footwork happened after Gaethje pressured him against the fence, and the footwork falls apart and goes right to it forces Edson into different stances. He has to skirt open, and Gaethje does the following right hook, which can work, and that's fine. But it's kind of the basic answer you see every time, and it goes away from a fighter's strength of game, right? And Volkanovski was able to do it to Yair, to success, granted, and Makhachev's one of the best fighters in the world. So I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to go too hard on Volkanovski, but if I had to split hairs here, again, comparing how one fighter decides to close the distance compared to how another was, there was even levels to that. And we're talking about two great fighters here, DJ and Volkanovski, right?
Absolutely. The thing with Volk on that is that against Islam, he wasn't really able to establish the threat of the rear leg. So when he's showing it, Islam doesn't really have anything to worry about. He knows that the shifting hook is coming, and he can kind of like sit back and wait for counters. And he landed a couple of big counters off that. Where Volkanovski would shift in and square himself up, and Islam was ready to punch back. Yeah. Where with Max, because Volkanovski was kicking up his leg the whole time, when Volkanovski picked up the leg, Max would be like, oh shit, don't want that. And then he'd get clobbered with the right hook.
Yeah, that makes sense. And between Volkanovski facing someone as good as Islam, and Volkanovski also traditionally not shooting in the open and more preferably shooting along the fence, it was easier for Islam to deduce that a shot wasn't coming off that either. Like we talked about that dual threat what DJ can set up from his.
And that's part of what makes Volkanovski really good in transitions, is that he'll use those kind of half effort shots very well to transition to an upper body position, and then elbow you. He's good in layers too, where he'll do the half effort shot, punch you a couple times, back onto your hips, and then he's back up uppercutting you.
Good inside trips
really relied on that. Oh yeah. In the later rounds of pretty much all three Max fights, I think, he really started overwhelming him in transitions. That was a big part of why he won the first two fights.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he's a great transitional fighter, but so I hate to nitpick on that one singular area, but I think just for me, because he was really close to being, like you, Ryan, he was really close to being on my list. He's like Volk, Cruz, and honestly, just because of my love for these fighters, probably, although I could justify both of them, do Bronx and Pantoja. Pantoja particularly just to piss off DJ. Not that he listens, but just because fucking everybody hates on Pantoja and it pisses me off because he just gets so much undeserved hate. I feel like, I'm not saying he's the greatest fighter in the world, but his coolness to how he's treated ratio is still fucking off in my book. Just saying.
He has defended his title 4 times now. So that is impressive.
And he puts on balls out fights every time, but just because he has terrible optics and looks tired, pass round 2, and whenever he bleeds, he does a cartoon thing where he just he does this, and it looks awful, and it makes it look like he lost the round to people. Like in the Brandon Moreno fight, it happened in a round that I actually go through, and you can actually not easily, but pretty justifiably score for him. But it's just that his optics are so bad off that elbow. And he does the it almost makes it look like he wants to quit, which obviously he doesn't. But that's people's reaction,
He looks like he's sucking wind really hard after the first round.
Yeah,
but
I
then he
mean,
just never stops coming.
but again, if you're talking about transitional fighters, it might not be the cleanest, but like people don't give him again another fighter who's known for his grappling, but actually has a lot of amateur Muay Thai experience. And again, it's sloppy technique, but at the same time, the guy can kick, he can punch, he can clinch, he can take down, and he can seamlessly go through all four of those phases.
Yeah.
And that's not even getting to his A game, which is scrambling. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what else do you want from the fucking guy?
For sure. He's definitely up there. Another flyweight that I wanted to give like a quick honorable mention
Please.
shout out to, UCA Formiga. He's not
Oh,
a guy
yes.
that I would like put super highly on this,
Sure.
mostly because he just doesn't hit people at all. If you
Yeah.
watch his later run in the UFC, he's dominating guys but barely winning the fights because he's like landing no strikes and doing no damage. But the way he strikes into his clinch entries is so beautiful. It's like some of the slickest stuff I've ever seen. Do you remember that duck under he hit on Zach Makovsky?
Oh,
That was
yeah. That's beautiful.
one of the
Zach's
slickest
good.
pieces of transitional offense I've ever seen in MMA. He it's a southpaw orthodox matchup. He
Mhm.
circles towards Makovsky's rear side to draw out his left hand. He slips under it, slips outside it, and then pivots all the way around to his back. So he just ducks under the left hand and then turns right towards his back. And from there, he does like a gorgeous Vieira roll where he gets like
Yeah.
a seatbelt grip,
Oh,
then turns his legs, like points them right up in the air, and then tips Makovsky over to take the back.
that's so sad. I haven't watched that in a minute.
Insane.
I love that. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've totally like you just brought that one back to me.
It's the
And he also
slickest
hits a
thing
cool
ever.
duck under against Cejudo in Mexico in like round 2, doesn't he? Like briefly
Yep.
get his back off that in like a split decision fight.
He does that a lot. Like the thing he's better at than almost anyone in MMA is just like those weird little transitional duck unders where like
Yes.
you think you're about to land a hook and like, oh, he's threatening a choke now. What happened?
Yeah, I love what we're talking about too, like the exposure of to these transitions and takedowns off of power shots from your rear, which is like, and I love that because we started off the episode explaining how impressive it was that Eve Edwards, like back in like the early 2000s, was still able to like as a striker able to like out sprawl these guys after throwing from his power side. Like that's fucking skill. Ain't AB86 adds to Feño's list and says all good. Or no, he says Edgar should be in there, and of course Feño agrees.
Don't worry, AB, we got you.
Yep, nudes in my profile. We always appreciate those. Simon at Triple Collar Tie says, Collar Tie. Speaking of Cejudo, he says Sterling and Cejudo deserve a shout. Unfortunately, parts of their games definitely do.
Yep. Sterling is a really good one, though I also think that like Peter Yan's over reliance on a high guard did a lot of work for Sterling's transitional offense.
True. I do think we'll give Sterling some love, though. Maybe or not. Speaking of, we got Ben Cohn here, who's let me get his official thing here. He's got GSP as his number one, but we were talking about peeking behind the curtain here. I might have Ben, of course, is at BJJ oversimplified, but maybe missed the first E and of over, or missed the E and over and the two first I's in simplified. And Ben will pop up, but GSP getting that top spot, of course, for him. And I'm gonna have Ben on. I don't know how we're gonna word it, like best RNC artists, pretty much. I think is how we're gonna word it, but I'm sure Aljo will find his way into the conversation, get some proper due there for anybody.
Definitely.
Sorry about that.
He hasn't hit a lot of chokes on people, but the one he hit on Sandhagen was such a slick setup that I'd almost find it hard to make a list like that without him.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I'm not missing anybody. Is there anyone that you see that missed for that? Otherwise, we can knock out the rest of the honorable mentions and just get out of here.
That was all I noticed.
All right. Well, we talked about Masvidal. He's on my honorable mentions list here. We just talked about Pantoja, who is tied with Oliveira, who I'll just add in real quick again. Oliveira, I know he struggled with wrestlers, but that doesn't mean he has actually made like marked improvements in his wrestling game, more offensively than defensively, obviously. But I think people forget like from the early like Jeremy Stevens in the small octagon wrestle heavy performances for like 5 rounds, showing that he can wrestle, to re-reminding people against Tony Ferguson. Speaking of Ben Cohn, I remember he did an excellent breakdown, I believe, on that, and Oliveira's like his top transition. So it's not just like in transition scrambles, off his back, front headlock. Like the guy's really just good from all positions. Kind of like Pantoja, they're BJJ guys, but not only are they not afraid of leg locks and not ignorant to them, they actually know how to use them in MMA context as far as using them to debase ground and pound, get up, create scrambles, even expose backs and other submissions from it. Look at that early calf slicer win from over Eric Wisely from Dubronx. I mean, Jesus. We mentioned Benson Henderson. We mentioned Peter Yan. He's obviously a really good transitional fighter, especially in just certain phases. He's obviously just insane from striking to clinch to grappling, as far as even from his earlier days, where a lot of his is just judo base trips and scrambles.
He's just uniquely good at damaging people. Like in any position that he can hurt you from, he'll figure out a way to hurt you.
Yeah, I forget what fight it is. It's one of his UFC fights against early ones against maybe not as good. I don't know if it's the Ishihara or someone else, but like he's not just like circling around them and like barraging them with punches, like almost like a Max Holloway or Ortega, where you're just angling off machine gun punches as you're angling off and angling back in. But he literally does it in like the most crazy spot. Like they're right against the fence, and there's like, kind of like, you could, put a cigarette paper in between, and hold between the fighter and the back of the fence. Yet somehow Peter Yan, mid-combination, like, he works himself between the fence and the fighter as he's doing this finishing combination. Like, he's just, I can't explain it. It's just insane, like, how fast he's moving with the action and how narrow of margins he's working in. But he just sees it. He's going. Leon Edwards, of course, definitely deserves mention,
Another one that almost made mine.
Yeah, again, not flashy stuff, right? Again, a lot more of I would argue, even though he's really, really putting together his southpaw arsenal. You see that as the Usman series in that third fight, especially. But like, yeah, a lot of his stuff is very defensive transitions, right? Yeah. He's more of those guys, right?
Extremely sound reactive clinch entries. Like anytime you're reaching to punch at him, he's probably going to slip it and tie you up, and nobody strikes better off the clinch entries than he does.
That hardwired left elbow. Yeah. Again, back to that common thread we had, right? Of off the break. Dominic Cruz, of course, and the last one on my honorable mentions, TJ Dillashaw, of course. Deserved mention, and I know everybody thinks of his shifting footwork, but people forget, like, the Wellel Watson and earlier points of his career. He was a really, really good back taker.
He used to be a control grappler.
Yeah. Yeah, people forget about those transition parts of his game, but he had it there too.
That like little shifting, like the shift step head kick thing that he did, where he'd change levels a bunch to get you like ducking into it, and then he'd suddenly do the switch his feet and kick you in the head, and you would just duck right onto his knee.
That was like such athletic cheating to me, but yeah, that was. He is such an. I mean, I know obviously, there was some help there, obviously, like a lot of fighters have had. Poor TJ, right? But yeah, man, say what you will. The dude definitely was.
Hey, man, who among us hasn't mainlined EPO?
Yeah, come on now. It's normal Saturday night for a lot of fighters, probably.
When Cody Garbrandt talked about how TJ taught him how to do steroids?
Yeah,
on a press conference.
This guy wrote the game, buddy. This guy wrote the game. Wow. Hopefully we did a good job. If there's any blaring ones, you could feel free to get us and make us go, oh, we're done. But we already recorded my old name.
They're going to mention Shevchenko.
Yes. Oh, Jesus Christ. I swear, there's I always like Shevchenko just because she was a southpaw and stuff, and maybe I got really high off my own call with the Holly Holm and the check right hook thing, but seeing how people have hornified and taken that, and I just love seeing that. I usually gauge this off the Jack Slack Twitter because I also feel guilty, but I'm not that guilty because I'm not big enough to have you can't blame me for the Musasi or the Shevchenko love, even though I have appreciation of those fighters. I will stand by it. But not like these crazy stands who Slack's making fun of there. I'm like, what what are people taking the ball and rolling with? Like, I definitely made comments about Moraes being big, but it wasn't because I thought Moraes was big. I was more just shitting on like one's like weigh-in protocol. But apparently, like Adriano Moraes has turned into a giant, according to MMA Twitter. Like,
Look,
these
man,
things just
the
grow out
reason
of
I'm not on
proportion.
camera is because I didn't want to take down my used Shevchenko fight shorts. I had them to my wall.
Oh my god, I don't know if those smell too good. I don't, I'm not gonna leave that there because I actually had an anecdotal. There's actually some anecdotal things to back that up, but that would not just require being mean to the fighter we're talking about, but that would also require throwing another fighter that you guys would know under the bus for making this observation about. Anyways, let's just get out of this hole, which we don't need to be talking about smells. All right, Brian, before we get out of here, why don't you plug where people want to, talk about non-Shevchenko stank talk and, well, maybe some of that too, but, where can they find your analysis and all your work?
You can find me on Twitter at Ryan A. Wag MMA, RyanAWAG MMA, and you can find my analysis at mixingmartialarts.com. I write weekly recaps of all the Muay Thai fights in Thailand, as well as occasional in-depth breakdowns. Premium subs are $5 per month, and you get early access to any YouTube video breakdowns I do, access to premium long-form content, and some now and again premium podcasts. You can also find me at the Mixing Martial Arts podcast. I've just started a podcast. I have 2 episodes out now, and that'll continue weekly. You can find that anywhere you get your podcasts.
And just for some, like, I don't know what you call this, like, not anecdote, but like the back of the book, quotes, like, this cured my AIDS, buy this book, all those my very real comment. No, it's a very real comment. For people that aren't familiar with Ryan's work, and they're familiar with mine, and my opinion is worth anything. Shouldn't be worth a lot, but let's just say it's worth something to you, assuming. Put it this way, like if I did a top 5 analysts, not only is Ryan easily on there, that's not even a question, but he's toward the top. Now, I can't go in depth with the numbers, and I'm just hurting people's feelings at that point.
Rank it down.
I'm probably gonna have people, who else is in your top 5, asshole? But no joke. I'm not just blowing steam. You're on my top 5. You should be on everybody's top 5. And for what it's worth, you're close to the very top of that list. You're more toward the top than to the bottom. That's for damn sure. So that's how high esteem I hold Ryan's analysis. It's very, it's worth whatever he's asking, whatever platform you have to download a podcast on, which apparently it's pretty widely available. So there's no excuses there. Support him in some shape or form, and you will probably walk away a slightly smarter person. For me, I would stay away from me. I feel like I'm just going to, you're going to catch some of my madness and shit. But if you want to support me, I really greatly appreciate it. I actually we'll see. I may having to be put up more ways you can support me. We'll just put it that way. I'll put a pin in it there. There's a lot going on, but there's nothing I would love more to provide you more of this, because as much as we complain about funny, silly, stupid things, I'm honestly so grateful to be doing this, and I'm doing everything I can, more than you guys know behind the scenes. I'm not, you ever suck dick for coke? And then Bob Saget, go easy on me. Okay, I'm maybe not that level yet, but I'm getting there, folks. So I'm trying hard. Maybe not, but I'm trying hard. To do my best. So if you guys want to support, keep a lookout for that. Find me at Dan Tom MMA. MartialAnalyst.com is the website that supports this here program, the Protect Your Neck podcast. 5-star ratings or reviews, likes. Anything, donations and super chat if you're feeling, really frisky. Not that I deserve that, but yes, please do so. Also, this is a top 5 that my outlet junkie did not want. So usually I like to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and like do my job as well as do fun stuff like this. But this title is not as clicky, I guess. So it'll probably be a top 10 Dustin Poirier fights you'll be looking from me, which is fine. And again, grateful to be doing it. But I only bring that up to say, please share this around if you liked it. Promote it any way you can, because the algorithms are against this. Ryan is an amazing analyst who was kind enough to give me his time for free on this here program that is always for free. And I'm giving to you for free. And hopefully you guys can just make our time worthwhile, because it's probably just going to live on here. And, I don't deserve it, Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it, but Ryan definitely in his time does.
He
So
does. He does.
don't let this be like another 53 views on YouTube. Help me pump this out, folks, please. And pump and because you're not going to help me, you're going to help my buddy Ryan, who's got a new podcast you need to be listening to, and that's another reason why I wanted him back on the program, because I complained about things not being MMA podcasts on my last podcast. Well, how about a positive solution? Let's bring on good people with good programming. So I did that. Hopefully you dig it. Enjoy your guys' nights, weekends, whatever you can on this crazy UFC schedule. And always protect your neck.